Oh, yeah. Hey, welcome to the Sunday show. I'm Matt Dillahunty. With me this week, Seth Anders. How are you, sir?
Good to see you again. I am well. Life's good. How are you?
I'm all right, all things considered. I was supposed to go have oral surgery, but the screw-ups at the airline managed to get all or most of my flights canceled. Supposedly, there's a refund coming. I'll wait and see if that actually hits. But it's difficult because you go through like a third-party travel service, and you got a couple different airlines, and then the first one screws up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll refund everything in 7 days." But I rescheduled my surgery appointment for August 21st, so we're going to try it again. Other than that, I mean, I saw Deadpool and Wolverine. Not going to talk about spoilers, but I enjoyed it and had a good time.
I've been watching the Olympics. It's funny, I don't watch most of these. I mean, tennis is the only sport I really watch, except for like I watch the Super Bowl. But I like to get into the Olympics and I do a primer right before. Who are the players? Who is
Yeah.
favored? Who is the underdog? And I'm struck by the events. I'm sorry, air rifle? Like that's my childhood. Ping
I
pong,
got one
those people
downstairs.
are insane. I can't even see that fast when I'm
Yeah,
watching
no,
tape.
ping pong.
Um,
I'm convinced the people who are playing like ping pong, table tennis, however you want to label it, these people are freaks from some other multiverse
yeah,
that move at speeds that like superheroes would love to move at.
it's crazy. There's a breakdancing category. How did this happen? Like, is breakdancing a sport? I guess it is. It's in the Olympics. Um, I
I
was
hadn't heard
watching
that.
archery. There's a pulse pounding sport, but I was fascinated by like badminton. Olympic badminton is insane. Because when you and I play at parties, it's always in slow motion and we can never get a rally going. And these people are intense. Like you could get hurt by the bird when it comes over the net. So, no, I've been watching the Olympics for what that's worth. Anyway.
I haven't watched
Um,
any of it yet. I didn't even get to watch the opening ceremonies. I heard there was some hubbub where some Christians got their knickers in a twist because they thought that the famous painting of the Last Supper was being mocked by a bunch of drag queens. And it turns out that's not actually what that was. It was a Bacchanalia celebration, cause Greece. But also, even if it had been them doing a drag queen parody of the Last Supper painting, so what? The Sopranos have done it, Lost did it, House did it, The Simpsons have done it, everybody's done it. It's an art trope that fits a specific model. And by the way, there's nothing about that painting of the Last Supper that is necessarily biblical or tied to your theology. It's just an artist representation of an event that we don't even know ever happened, and certainly didn't look like that. Nobody sets up a room with a table with everybody on one side of it facing a non-existent camera.
yeah. Well, I myself, and I didn't love the opening ceremonies. For me, I told Natalie it's hard to describe, but it was wide, but it wasn't deep. I felt like the camera's back here. I felt a bit disconnected. I felt bad for the athletes who had to compete for 2 weeks, who were standing out trapped on a boat in the rain. But there were highlights. There were pieces of it that I really enjoyed. And then Celine Dion, we just watched the documentary about her having stiff person syndrome, and while I don't follow her like intently, I'm an admirer. I think she's an extremely talented person who's marked 4 decades in the arts or pop music, et cetera. And to see the struggles and to watch her essentially lose her instrument. And the documentary, it's called I Am, it is heartbreaking. And then there she is standing on the Eiffel Tower singing. I was just absolutely, Natalie and I were both deeply moved by that. So I thought it was okay, but I mean, taste is subjective. Some people loved it, some people Hated it. I myself have had a few people in my own inner circle who have, two people on my Facebook timeline indignantly said, "I'm done with the Olympics. I refuse to watch," as if it's a moral stand. And I thought to myself, those verses in the Bible, the victory is already won. Satan is defeated. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. Not a hair, all the hairs of my head are counted. Not a sparrow shall fall from the sky apart from my Father's care. These people are divinely protected. And then they run around and they lose their shit over everything. Show them a part of the opening ceremony, bring a Ouija board into the house, bring in a purple Teletubby. Have Sam Smith and devil horns at the Grammys. Just mention the word socialism. It doesn't matter what it is. They lose their minds. So for divinely protected people, they sound awfully tissue skinned to me. That's just an observation.
Yeah. It's difficult watching to some extent, and I don't want to necessarily paint you with this, who we used to be or who we potentially could have been had things not changed. And I get it. I know who I am. And on the occasions where I'm particularly thin-skinned, it is about things like Trump and Project 2025. It is about, the real threat to democracy. And I get incredibly frustrated, as people know. I'm getting ready to do a video about lying and hyperbole and exaggerating and how it's potentially incredibly counterproductive. When you come out and you say, hey, this is what this group of people or this individual wants, and you're wrong, because they don't think about it that way, they get to just dismiss you. They don't get to pay, oh, you've got Trump derangement syndrome, you've got the woke liberal mind virus. There's no substance there. I want my positions to have, for everything, to have the best arguments, the best evidence, to be able to say, hey, I'm being honest on this. I'm not engaged in exaggeration or hyperbole. It's not when Andrew Seidel and I are talking about what is the likelihood that there could be a civil war. If 15 years ago, that would have been a preposterous question. But 15 years ago, I think it would have been preposterous to think the Supreme Court would be where it is right now, and that Roe would have been overturned, and that we would be seeing them elevate the presidency to the point of, near king status on a number of issues, but not all of them. And so this, it's for me, it's just about not overreacting. And yet I'm at this point. I had to shut down a thread on my Facebook page yesterday. It was just a joke. It was a picture of Beyonce and Taylor Swift saying, imagine what's going to happen when these two endorse Kamala Harris. And to some extent, Beyonce kind of already has. She let her use a song. They called her up and said, hey, can Vice President Harris use this song? And she's like, yeah, sure. And Taylor has been slightly more political. Now, nobody should care what any celebrity says. I'm not saying that it should be the case of, ooh, Beyonce and Taylor have endorsed this person, so now I'll go with it. No, you need to be better informed than that. You need to just not pick who you're voting for based on which celebrity you like. But the fact of the matter is we live in a world where that is going to impact how many people vote and what direction they vote. That's great. It went to the extent that it inspires people to participate in the system, but we need to do better with information. And we need to make sure that we're not exaggerating or misrepresenting the facts, because I don't see how that's a path to change or improvement or anything good. I don't know.
I'm interested too in, I think many of the people who have come forward in support of, like, Kamala's candidacy, etc. If they had been on the other side, it would have been like, see, look who we have. And, whenever that celebrity comes out for the opposition, they're like, oh, what a shallow endorsement. Or, they're in league with, group X, satanic cult, this or whatever. But we can all be guilty, I think, of overreach, of double standards. We can all be, who was it who said we are emotional bags of animated meat? So this idea that liberals cannot knee jerk. We cannot make bad decisions. We cannot be biased. We cannot be led around by bad information. And I think one of the fights I've been having recently is, we can be just as guilty sometimes of seeing something that leans into what we want to be true or what feels like could be true. And we roll with it without fact checking. And anytime somebody says we are immune, I'm always like, was it Feynman who said, or was it Phil Plait who said, the minute you think you cannot be fooled, you already have? And I always try to draw a circle. And many people they think that's a cheat. Like somehow I'm ceding ground or making a false equivalent statement. All I'm saying is that we are all human. And in a time and culture where we are being bombarded with information, our brains simply cannot keep up. We tend to read the headline, we have a reaction at the headline, and then we act on it or share it or maybe even amplify it, alter it, change it, mutate it. I don't know. I just think we can all be guilty and we need to slow down, take a breath. And I don't think that's a position of weakness. I think that's a position of strength. It's not popular, but that's kind of the fight I've been having lately.
So we have callers ready. By the way, this is a call-in show like all the shows that are on the line. We do this show here at 2 p.m. Central every Sunday. It's not always me and Seth. So if you don't like me, if you don't like Seth, I don't know. If you don't like Seth, I don't know what's wrong with you. If you don't like me, you're probably fine. But if you don't like us, there'll be another Sunday show after dark tonight at 7 p.m. Central with Jimmy and Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels, and there'll be other people on at different times. Also on this network on Monday, Erika Gibbon will be doing Skeptalk on Monday. I don't know for sure who her co-host is for Skeptalk, and Erika will also be doing Chewed Gum on Tuesday with the lovely and talented and definitely my favorite Arden Hart, because But then on Wednesday, I'll be doing the hang up with J Mike, and Thursday's transatlantic call-in show is going to be Josie and nominal Naomi. So, hey, it's been a while since I've seen Naomi on there. So it's good to have them back. And we have callers if you're ready, sir.
Yeah, I'm all yours.
Okay. We're going to start off with theistic caller Matthew from Ohio, pronouns a he, him, who's called in a variety of times, and it doesn't always go well, but I'm genuinely incredibly optimistic about this one. So Matthew, it says here you've got a question about what we mean when we ask for proof of God. How are you?
Fine and well. How about yourself?
I'm pretty good. I can answer that question, kind of, but hopefully this will clear things up. When I say, can you prove God? Or when the title, like today's title for the show says, can you prove God exists? We're not using prove in the mathematical sense. Like, I understand. I'm trying to kill off the overly pedantic people who want to say that proof is only a mathematical concept. That no, we're using it in the colloquial sense. I mean, there is sufficient evidence to demonstrate that a particular model is strongly likely to be correct. And by evidence, all we're saying is the facts that are exclusively consistent with a specific proposed model of reality. The reason I say that is, like, let's say we find a dead body, and your model, your proposed solution to why there's a dead body is that the butler did it. Well, the body itself is evidence of the body and potentially has evidence of the crime. But the body itself is going to exist no matter who killed that body. And so that the body isn't evidence for the proposition that the butler did the crime. And so if we're talking about a God, what you need to do is define that God's characteristics. And then in order to create, here's my proposed model of God, and then provide evidence that demonstrates that that proposed model is most probably correct. Does that make sense?
It does. Now, does proof, as you're describing it as, is that a subjective concept or an objective concept?
You are the subjective. You get to assess. I mean, you are either convinced that or you're not. There's not like an objective, we need 18 pieces of data at this particular level. That's just not the way it works. You're either convinced or you're not. And you can be convinced for good reasons or bad reasons.
Right. So when we talk about proof, for you, me proving God exists to you, you're saying that that's kind of a subjective concept more than it is objective.
Well, it's objective whether or not I'm convinced, but that's the result of a subjective assessment. What difference does it make if it's objective or subjective? Do you have some
Right.
objective
Well,
standard of proof?
if it's
Hang on. Do you have some
mhm.
objective standard of proof that you prefer to my model?
Not necessarily. The reason why I asked whether it's subjective or
Can you objectively demonstrate under any standard that a God exists?
I'm convinced that I can.
Okay. We're all ears. Go for
But
it.
my question for you though is, if it's subjective to you, is it possible for you to say, well, I'm not convinced by that, thus that's
Yes.
not proof?
Yes.
Okay, so you can in a sense move the goalpost in a sense.
No, I don't understand, Matthew, why this is so difficult to you. Instead of calling in and thinking you understand and building towards a got you, just assess what I've actually said. There's nothing here about moving the goalposts. Once you establish the criteria of this is the model that I'm trying to prove, you can then say how much type and quality and quantity of evidence would be sufficient to demonstrate that. And when you demonstrate that, it'll be done. It's not about moving the goalposts. Each claim has its own evidentiary standard. There's not a goalpost moving. The reason that you think there's a goalpost moving is because the evidence that I need for you to say, to be convinced that you have a new pet puppy is different from the evidence that I need to be convinced that you have a new invisible pet dragon. That's not moving the goalpost. That is setting up criteria for two different claims.
No, that's fine. I'm just making sure that, as you said before, that it's still subjective to you. So even if I were to prove it, you can say, well, I'm not
You
convinced.
didn't prove it. You didn't prove it.
Pardon?
You're trying to do, I don't know why we're wasting time on this, Matthew, because what you're doing is saying, ooh, so even if I prove it, if you're not satisfied, you'll just say I didn't prove it. Well, if you didn't prove it, you didn't prove it. How can you assert that you proved it and that my standards are weak if you can't come up with standards that are better?
Oh, no. Sorry. I haven't asserted that I proved it yet.
Actually, you did. You said, I'm convinced that I can prove God.
Well, my apologies. I mean,
Convinced
to
that
you,
you can.
I haven't asserted.
So go ahead.
Pardon?
Go ahead. Demonstrate what is your proposed proof that God exists. We can then address it. And the nice thing about this, which some of us have done for 20 years now, is that you can present what you think should be convincing, and we can then talk about why we're not convinced and why we don't think you should be convinced. Or we can say, you've finally demonstrated this to the point where we think it's reasonable for you to be convinced. So instead of dancing around about what the standards are, I've already answered that. It's the same for everything. Every claim carries with it a burden of proof, and there is some evidence that is exclusively consistent with that claim to demonstrate that it's likely correct. And then the entire discussion becomes about whether or not Seth and I are being reasonable, honest investigators of the claim and the available evidence, or whether you are. We're ready to go. Are you ready to go?
That's true. Yes. So for me, what I'm convinced is that God is reality in and of itself. And the criteria I use for that is when I read the Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, what comes out of that, the ideas that come out of that are consistent with the ideas that come out of the book of John and the behavior of Jesus Christ that is presented. So to me, that shows me that God exists, that God is reality. Even when he talks to Moses in the Exodus and says, I am that I am, he's claiming to be what is, which is reality.
Okay. So you're saying God is reality, and your criteria for that is that when you read Proverbs, what comes out of that is consistent with the ideas that come out of John with regard to Jesus's behavior. I'll give you $1 billion if you can construct that into a valid and sound syllogism that demonstrates that God is reality. You can't do it because the way a syllogism works, didn't I ask you to look up syllogism before, Matthew?
Yeah.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah.
Cool. So how does a syllogism work?
So two premises, premise one, premise two, then conclusion.
Yeah. And the premises are a particular structure for valid arguments, right? There's a major
Right.
premise and a minor premise and a connecting term, right?
Okay.
And
I didn't get that.
the conclusion comes from connecting the major and minor premises. So if you have a conclusion whose terms are not in the premise, you have an invalid syllogism, correct?
Yeah, fair. That's very fair.
Cool. So your conclusion is God is reality, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yet your premise is that you read Proverbs and what comes out of that is consistent with what you read in John. So the God concept doesn't exist in your premises. Reality does not exist in your premise. So therefore, your argument is invalid and dismissed. What do you got? Next.
So, yes, I would say reality does exist in my premise because I also brought out in Exodus where Adonai tells Moses that he's basically claiming to be what is basically reality.
No. So first of all, wow. So first of all, saying to Moses, I am, does not mean I am reality. And also, you haven't demonstrated that a God said anything. You've demonstrated that a book makes a claim, and the book does not make any explicit claim that God is reality. So, strike two. What do you got next, Matthew?
So for me, the alpha and the omega would be reality. But like I said, that's what convinced me. If it doesn't convince you, then that is what it is.
Okay. So, but you still don't have any valid or sound syllogism that you can demonstrate. So the fact is, you're convinced for irrational reasons. Do you have a rational reason to be convinced?
So you said that I'm convinced for irrational reasons. Can you explain to me why they're irrational?
Yes. If you're convinced by a syllogism that is invalid, that is irrational.
And so how are you claiming that my syllogism is invalid?
I've already explained it to you multiple times. A syllogism must have a major premise, a minor premise, and connecting terms. You don't have that, and God and reality don't exist in your premise.
Right. So when I understand, remember I said I'm convinced. So when I understand what he's saying to Moses, and also what comes out of Proverbs is that everything that is he created, shows me that reality is the only thing that always existed. And he says, I'm the Alpha, the Omega, saying that he always existed and will always exist to the end. These
So
are
once again,
properties of reality.
you're telling me what the Bible says. So your syllogism at best contains the Bible says. It does not contain God says.
I'm convinced of the biblical God.
You don't get to do that. That now makes your entire argument circular. The very thing you're trying to demonstrate is that a biblical God exists. You don't get to assume the biblical God exists in order to make an argument that the biblical God exists, because that is a circular argument, which is yet another fallacy. Have you got anything that's not fallacious, Matthew? Because it doesn't seem that having you try and go learn about syllogisms has made this any better. And I was really optimistic.
So it's not an assumption for me. It's what I see and what I observe and what I experience.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Matthew. You don't understand reason, rationality, evidence, syllogisms. You don't get to assume God. You don't get to say, I'm convinced there's a God, therefore the claims I'm making about the Bible are reasonable. That's not how demonstrations work.
So just because you say that I'm assuming God doesn't mean I'm assuming God. You're just saying I'm irrational and that I don't assume it. But does that mean that's the case?
Actually, it does mean that's the case. I've given the example of why you're irrational, because you are convinced of something for no good reason. You've begun with the very thing that you're trying to demonstrate, which is that you are convinced that a God exists, which makes your argument circular. I'm sorry that you don't have any argument that is not fallacious, but that's not my problem. And it's not an assertion by me. If you went and talked to anyone who's ever taught a course in logic, they would point out that you have not presented a valid or sound syllogism or any warrant for why you believe something, and that your entire argument here is circular, that you don't get to begin with, I'm convinced a God exists, in your proof of, here's why it's reasonable to believe a God exists. I'm sorry, you need to go take a course on logic because you are confused about everything and you want to dismiss it as, oh, Matt's just saying I'm irrational. No, you are by definition irrational. You have flawed arguments at every single point. If you can't fix that,
so you
there's no
assert that
point in
with
carrying.
confidence,
If you
so it makes
can't,
it seem like I do have.
if you can't present a valid and sound syllogism, we're done. Try again.
Mm-hmm. So you're asserting these things with confidence, making it seem like I don't have any valid arguments. You said things that you misrepresented what I said, and I expressed to you that the reason why reality is evident in
Goodbye,
what
Matthew.
God says in the
Goodbye,
Bible.
Matthew.
Pardon?
Goodbye, Matthew. I am in fact an expert on logic. I am in fact factually correct about your invalid and unsound syllogisms. I am in fact factually correct about your circular reasoning. You are not ready for this. Oh, now you hung up. Okay, cool. All right. So now we're done with that, which is unfortunate because I had asked Matthew to call back once he had an understanding of these things. And here's the thing. If you, this is why I suspect Matthew wanted to talk about whether or not the evaluation was subjective or objective. That way, my evaluation, by the way, of what is reasonable is my personal subjective assessment. But my evaluation of your argument is objective. Your argument is objectively invalid. Your argument is objectively circular. You can complain all day that, well, you're just saying that, you haven't demonstrated it. It's a fact. And it's an obvious fact to anyone who has bothered to study it. I can tell you what a circular argument is. A circular argument is one that assumes the conclusion in its premise. And that's exactly what you did when you say you start with, you believe that the Bible is God representing God's views. Well, that's the very thing that you're trying to demonstrate, is that there is a God who is the God of the Bible. Anyway. All right. Well, this next caller is new or semi-new. Theist David from New York, pronouns are he, him. Young Earth creation is the only plausible explanation for human supremacy. Otherwise, animals will eventually evolve to be smarter than us. How do you know that they won't? What makes you think that other animals won't evolve to be smarter than us, David?
Okay, let's assume that they won't be, okay? Let's assume that.
Why would I assume the thing that you're claiming?
Well, no, I'm saying we'll assume I'm wrong, and then I'll still have an argument today. Why young Earth creation is the only plausible explanation for human supremacy.
Okay. I don't know what you mean by human supremacy, but go ahead. You're on with Seth and Matt.
Okay. So do you guys, just as a heads up, I am not a vegan, but do you guys eat meat?
Yes.
Okay. So if you believe in evolution, then that mean that you were eating your ancestors?
No.
Expound on that, please.
I'm not eating my ancestors.
But you evolved from them, didn't you?
No, I didn't evolve from the chicken that I ate earlier.
Okay.
How come your voice sounds so boomy, David? Are you using some kind of a changer or enhancer for the call?
Yeah.
So we're not hearing you, David. We're hearing some sort of an altered or fabricated version of you. Is this a secrecy thing or what?
No. I never said that.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
So we had a problem understanding the last thing you said, David.
Yeah, why don't you attack my arguments instead of my voice?
I'm not
Seth didn't
attacking. I
attack
ask a basic
anything.
question.
He just
I'm
asked a
sorry. Go ahead,
question,
Matt.
and no,
Yeah, Seth,
we're
why is your
happy
face so
to.
red always?
Why is my face red? Well, I'm a tennis player. Been out in the sun a couple hours today. It's more kind of bronze than red. Hopefully not Trumpian bronze. That's more of an orange, but
Do you
I'm
see how
just a
irrelevant
creature of the
that was?
outdoors. Are
Sorry.
you
Yeah.
calling to
Well,
seek
let's get back to the
attention?
arguments.
Because I think we've given you quite a bit. So, I
No,
mean,
let's
you
get
can.
back to the arguments, actually.
I'd love to
I'm
get back to the
wildly
argument,
curious.
but you haven't presented an argument, and you haven't. So, what do you mean by human supremacy?
Do you eat animals?
Yes, I've already answered. Why are you asking questions I've already answered? What do you mean by human supremacy? Last chance. Hello? Oh, he ran away.
I think he may have called my broadcast a week or two ago. You get the vibe. This is I don't know. I don't want to assume intent, but you do get the impression, or you have to wonder if this is someone who is so desperate for any modicum of attention that they will try to enhance themselves even vocally, and then call a show perhaps so they can hear the reverberations of their own voice in a way to amplify their own importance, when the truth is they become a self-canceling noise. It makes me pity these people just a little bit. I think, if this is how you focus your time and your energy, if this is how validation appears in your mind, this is what you pursue to feel stronger, taller, more relevant. I do have kind of a sense of pity for those people. As far as superiority, he never did answer the question, or supremacy. I have no idea what he was talking about.
It's really strange to me because I just wanted to answer the question, and it was like I did the entire first call because that was a call back from Matthew, and I was like, just answer the question, and then we can, Seth can go in there. And evidently, all he wanted from you was to know why your face was red. But when you say something like young Earth creationism is the only explanation for human supremacy, now I want to know what human supremacy means. Do you eat animals? Yeah. Okay. Cool. You know who else eats animals? Other animals. So you can't make an argument for supremacy based on do you eat animals. So already any hope you have of syllogism going that way is broken. But why does I was really curious why young Earth creation is the only explanation for human supremacy, but I don't know what human supremacy is.
I was talking to Forrest Valkai a few months back on camera. We'd done a sit down. We were talking about survival of the fittest and how this has often been misunderstood or even misinterpreted or become disinformation by creationists, because in their minds, fittest means big, strong, powerful, who could kick somebody else's ass in a street fight kind of fittest, when the truth is we're talking about the most well adapted to be able to pass on your genes. And it's all contextual. So if I look at human supremacy, well, if you throw me in the water near the Great Barrier Reef, I think there are great whites near the Great Barrier Reef, I would not necessarily be the fittest. I am not adapted for that environment. If you put me in a forest or a jungle filled with venomous insects that could bite me and put me away at any moment, I am not the most well adapted. I am not the fittest. I am not supreme in that context. And so when you say the word human supremacy, my first thought is, well, in what context would he possibly mean it? And he didn't give any context whatsoever. I was so struck by it, it made my face turn red, apparently. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess. Okay.
I'm just shy.
What we've got,
I'm shy. So
here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday show on the line. We started about 35 minutes ago, and our primary reason for being here is to see if we can get people who disagree with us on theistic issues or supernatural claims, which I don't even know necessarily what that means. So if you have some supernatural belief and you have some definition of supernatural that you'd like to demonstrate, defend, make use of, by all means, call in. If you think you have a good reason to believe that a God exists, by all means, call in. If you are calling in to say that you are convinced that a God exists, and then you try to use that the fact that you're convinced to build an argument that will be circular because you're being convinced is not necessarily a good reason for us to be convinced. If you want to make a case for...
Oh, forgive me, brother. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
When Matthew called in and he immediately began to invoke a foundation in Proverbs and then on Moses, I mean, we can just stay in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask him, well, can you tell us who wrote Proverbs and who wrote the book of Exodus? And was there a literal Moses? And how do you know that? You know, to be able to say, well, Moses said this is not actually the beginning of that conversation. And I wanted to know, well, how do we know a Moses even existed? Because we certainly don't know that. And we can say for sure that he didn't write all the Pentateuch. Even if he did exist, we know he wasn't there before space-time to chronicle the creation of all things. There were no humans alive at that time. There were so many other questions. But to say, well, Moses said this, and the book of Proverbs says that. I mean, apologists can guess Solomon and some students may have written Proverbs, but no one actually knows. And so it seems like an odd place to build a foundation for a proof of any God. Those were my thoughts. So.
Yeah, it's I mean, the proposal from tradition is that Proverbs is essentially the writings or thoughts of Solomon the Wise. Solomon the Wise. I feel like I'm starting a like a follow-up to the Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings type.
Solomon the Wise. Yeah.
Solomon the Wise.
But don't some people, Matt, come in? And wasn't it you who said, and I borrowed / stolen this, where someone says, if they're not making the claim, well, you just want to be atheist, you just want to sin. It doesn't matter if I prove God because you're not going to accept it. I mean, I've heard that one. But I believe years ago I heard you say that I don't need to know what it would take to change my mind. Because if there is an all-powerful God, that God would know what it would take to change my mind. Am I misrepresenting what you said? That's what's in my memory, anyway.
That's it.
I just think it's a great response. Like, if there's a God that knows everything and cares enough and already has that path to belief ready for me, right? The plan's there, then that God could do whatever it would take. And I don't even need to know what that would be in advance. I would simply be convinced overwhelmingly. So
I'd love to know, but you're right. I don't need to know in advance. And it's a response to this note. Well, you atheists are so arrogant. Really? What's arrogant about saying, I don't know what would or should convince me, but if there's a God, that God, as you describe it, should absolutely know exactly what would convince me and hasn't done it, which means either he doesn't want me to know right now, or he may never want me to know, or he doesn't exist. Either way, it's not my problem. It's God's problem. It's God's plan. I mean, all of this fits in. Now, there are different God models. And actually, what you mentioned about like Matthew going to Proverbs, you know, when he reads Proverbs, he sees it as a reflection of Jesus, and Jesus's character as presented by John. So he reads the writings that are attributed to Solomon and he connects that. That's a perfectly fine thing to do. To say there's something about the claims in style here that I also see mirrored over here. That isn't itself proof, but it's, you know, it's at least a connection. I find it interesting that because it's just a slightly different take on it. So it doesn't matter to me who wrote Proverbs, and the truth of something isn't impacted by who it comes from. It's only about whether or not it's consistent with the facts. So while I think it would have been interesting, especially for Matthew, who I think he slips into this top-down authority view that he reads Proverbs, begins with this presumption that this is all coming from the mind of God, and then takes that and builds it. He's wearing the God glasses that you talked about in one of your talks from years ago. And so he sees it through that lens.
I did one podcast a few weeks ago, and I've got another one scheduled for late August called the Atheist Bible Trivia Show. And we do, you know, it has been statistically revealed that atheists tend to know the scriptures better than those who say they believe in them. And so I went back and And I put together a long list of often fun, sometimes bizarre, many times alarming questions. And we get into, Onan, who's having sex with his brother's wife and then spilling his seed on the ground. And I'm doing it from memory. Ezekiel had to lay on his side for a year and 2 months and cook. He was commanded to cook food with his own poop, and just wacky. The story of Dinah. And, was it Eglon who was killed by the sword that was swallowed by the fat in his body? And just all this wacky, crazy stuff that's in the Bible. But if anybody is interested in stories out of, especially the old, but we get into the new and Revelation, the end times prophecies as well. I've got some shows coming up on atheist trivia. And so we can get into some of these wacky old and new books of the Bible, whose authorship has never been known or proven. But the stories themselves are interesting and often horrifying and great to teach to 8-year-olds in Oklahoma public schools, apparently, according to Superintendent Ryan Walters. That's a whole other conversation.
They're going to get sued to into the ground. I have a couple books
out of control.
I wish I had thought to grab them. So there's a book called The X-Rated Bible. That Frank Zindler wrote. It's part of American Atheist Press. But David Fitzgerald did a talk about several years ago. Fitz, if you're listening and you see this, feel free to post a link in chat, or maybe next time I have you on, which isn't going to be too far down the road, we can talk about it. But I remember David gave a good talk about kind of like the quirky, weird X-rated Bible and all the little weird stories that are in there. That was probably 12 years ago or more.
I remember he was on stage doing Song of Solomon with Cara Santa Maria, and in the background, yes, I think he had porn music going. It was just wild, just wild.
It is so much. It is so much fun. Now, here's the thing. To button this point that I was making, I like that is one of the reasons why I love doing shows with people who come at things from a different angle than I do. And by all means, you already know, Seth knows, jump in whenever. I'll go on a tear for a while, but there's a delay. There's even a delay between me and Seth, which is actually part of the problem of the show, is that there's just this slight delay there. But you were wanting to ask Matthew about who the author, or who he thinks the author of Proverbs is. And I don't even think in those terms because I already know that we don't know. And if he thought it was written, like if you go to the Gospel of Matthew, people think it's written by Matthew. There's really good reason to think that that's almost certainly wrong. But at best, we can say we don't know. It's tradition that it's described this way. But the author doesn't matter. It's like, I trust Seth. Seth is genuinely one of the best people and my best friends that I've had in this movement for all of these years. If Seth tells me something, I'm more likely just to take it as, oh, that's probably true. If it's really bizarre, I'll probably go double check, but generally speaking, I trust Seth. But just because Seth tells me something does not mean that I necessarily have good reason to believe it. And even you were pointing out, we're all going to get duped on something.
My angle, though, I think is not that it would be like a variation on the argument of authority from authority. We know who wrote Proverbs, and that person was credible. I take a little bit of a reverse angle, the fact that it cannot be sourced, which makes it even more dubious. I think it has utility to be able to say we simply don't know where it came from, where their author or authors, plural. So I don't totally dismiss authorship or the lack of knowledge about authors. I think that does have utility, at least when it comes to discrediting the witness just a little bit. If we knew who it was, then that leads to a whole other series of conversations. But you're right. I mean, the claims themselves are the ones that are front and center. I take your point.
No. This was not even in the ballpark of corrective. I think it brings a lot of value in, because there's great lines of argument that I'm going to ignore because I know that, A, B, and C are likely irrelevant. But it's a good teaching moment for anybody who doesn't necessarily know, and potentially the caller. And no, it's awesome, and we're ready for other calls. We have Rogue Show calling from South Carolina, pronouns are he, him. Rogue Show is an atheist who wants to talk about navigating moral arguments. So you're on with Seth and Matt. How are you, Rogue Show?
I'm doing all right. Nice to meet you, Seth.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Long time, no talk, Matt.
Yeah, welcome back.
So you definitely, both of you definitely have gotten the mouthful about, from a theist, why murder is bad or something, and then when you answer, they say, yeah, but why does it matter? Shit like that. It's generally a conversation I have trouble navigating through. Because I sort of take the position that morality is subjective based on the fact that we often our moral systems often come from what values we subscribe to, whether it be upbringing or just finding a moral argument more convincing over the other, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just need help navigating.
Sure. All right. Like, what's a question that a theist has asked you that you find you struggle with?
So yeah, one of my friends was. I brought up that point to one of my friends, and was theist, and he asked it was just based on like personal. It was based on a moral. If it's based on a moral system we're interested in, why can't someone say that their moral code is to kill everybody or something?
They could. Someone could say that their moral code is predicated on the extermination of humans, and then we would have two people with completely different foundations. And I don't know how you necessarily make progress with that, other than saying, okay, my moral foundation is on extending the life, health, and happiness of human beings, and yours is on exterminating it. So even if we are talking about morality, we have dramatically different values. And so we're not going to agree until we get to values. But I think you'll find most people are like, I want to make the world a better place. That what would be morally good should be best described as I want to make the world a better place. And then we can go, the next step is to say, what do you mean by a better place? And then you might say, oh, well, I'm advocating for the well-being and flourishing to whatever extent is reasonably possible of humans. And if their idea of the world being a better place is the extermination of humans, then you have to have a conversation, if one's even possible, about why they have that as the foundation of their morality. Most people, when you engage with them, are not going to go down that route. The overwhelming majority of people don't have let's kill everything and burn it down as their moral foundation. They just have different ideas about what produces a better world. For example, when I was a Christian and others, the foundation of morality is the God of the Bible, and whatever his views are that's the foundation. And so if you're convinced that God's opposed to homosexuality and abortion or whatever else, then those things become immoral. And so once I became convinced that that was not a good enough foundation, that in fact did not lead to a better world, I changed. If you're up against somebody who says killing humans will lead to a better world, I think the first question is, better for whom?
Yeah.
If I can jump in quickly, Rogue Show, would that be all right?
Yeah.
Just a quick addition. Some people talk about whether or not morality is subjective. I don't know how it cannot be subjective. More than that, though, I'd like to say it's situational. It's outcome based.
Yep.
And if we look at harm, and I think we can all know what harm is because we have experienced harm, right? If someone was to murder us, we would qualify that as harm. If we were to be tortured, that would be harm. We can abuse and all these other things. If a terrible accident was to befall us, calamity, whatever, that took us away from our bodily functions or our families or this life in general, we would call that harm. And I think we can use that and project that onto our treatment of other people. And those tribes in our evolved past and the tribes today that murder and rape and kill and dismember and do all these horrible things, as groups, as populations, don't fare well because they have essentially shredded each other. It is the ones that conduct themselves in pro-social behaviors are the ones that flourish. And so helping someone else helps the tribe, and then it reflects back on me. And in that way, I think it's a lot easier to understand how even a subjective situational morality model can work. My friend Gail Jordan at Recovering from Religion, I put her on camera a few years ago, and she was talking about how we want to live in a world where we decrease the suffering and increase the joy. And I just think that's a win-win. It's a win for others, and then it sort of ripples back toward us. It's a win for everyone. And so if we look at morality in terms of populations, in terms of groups, the human tribe, I don't think it'll be all that difficult to try to explain that to your friend unless they're simply not listening. I don't know. Did I explain that very well, my friend?
Yeah. I guess but an often follow-up question I get is like, why does human flourishing matter? And
is that a
it's
riff
sort
on
of-
if we don't live forever kind of a matter? If we aren't eternal beings, then why would it matter how we treat each other in this finite world?
I guess I just get like, or why I just get like, why does human flourishing matter if I bring up, well, if we act in a social behavior, if we act in a more social behavior, we'll more likely flourish as a human society. And then I usually get the why does it matter that humans are flourishing?
Well, I mean, if I may, just one last line, I'm not sure why it would even be a question. Why would a greater quality of life, why would less suffering and more joy, even moment by moment, matter? Why would I not want to flourish? It's an odd question. It makes me wonder if the questioner is actually saying that in order to have quality of life, you would have to have their God, you would have to live by their model. Everything is meaningless without my God. I get that, the vibe that might be why they might, why does it matter if it's just you and you're an evolved primate kind of a thing? And I just think that's crazy. My life matters more to me now that I am not convinced I'm an eternal being, that the moments aren't forever, that, I got to make the most of every second. And the temporary nature of this life has actually motivated me to more be interested in decreasing the suffering and increasing the joy, making the most of every day. It sounds like a Lifetime movie, but that's kind of where I shake out on that.
Yeah, the notion of asking the question, why does human flourishing, why does that matter? Well, it doesn't matter to a chimp. It doesn't matter to a black soldier fly larva, unless we're doing something specific to contribute or aid them. But it matters to us. And so when you say, why does human flourishing matter? Well, first of all, it matters to me because I'm a human and I'd like to flourish. I'd also like for the people that I love and care about to also flourish. I'd like there to be other humans around, not just in this, humans are valuable, we need to keep them, not in some objective sense. The question itself implies that there's some objective standard that needs humans. No, the universe doesn't give a shit about humans. We're probably going to go extinct, just like the overwhelming majority of species that have ever existed. But it matters to us. And since it's us who is sitting here discussing morality, we're evaluating the consequences of our actions and our purported ability to self-reflect and change and modify our behavior, and our incredible means of communication to potentially influence others to change their behavior. And so if living reasonably well is valuable to me and to Seth and to you and to the people that we know, the person who's asking the question, why does human flourishing matter, is either looking at, can you give me an objective reason that the universe needs humans to exist? My answer is no. I don't see any reason. And when if that's what you're looking for, can you give me any objective reason that the universe gives a shit about anything, or that anything matters to the universe? In order for something to matter, it has to have value. In order for something to have value, you have to have a mind that values it. And so and I hate to, this is not a statement about our position of human superiority, but as the thinkers on the planet, as far as we know, we're the best thinkers on the planet. We might not be, we might, who knows, but we're the ones that are thinking and having discussions about morality. And so it matters to me, and other people matter to me, not just because I love them and want to spend time with them, but also I benefit from the communal aspect of this. If I go see a good movie, I didn't write that, I didn't direct it, I didn't produce it, I didn't act in it, but yet I still got enjoyment out of it. If I go get a meal that I didn't have to prepare myself, yes, I'm providing someone food, but the sum total of their life with respect to food goes into that plate of food that I'm going to have and enjoy. And I do enjoy it.
Yeah.
Why is it not enough that we enjoy living better? I'm always baffled at why life isn't viewed as its own reward, and why morality and seeking human flourishing isn't just the default assumption. I get that there's always going to be people who don't want or care about that, but they're the outliers. And when your view is, I don't care about human suffering, you are removing yourself from the discussion about human suffering. Because I love Seth. I don't give a fuck about tennis. I've never cared about tennis. And so I remove myself from the discussions about tennis and pickleball. Although as I get older, I'm told I might play more pickleball, but I don't care about it. I've never watched an episode of Gossip Girl. Love Blake Lively. Never watched an episode of it. Don't care about it. I'm not going to be in the conversations about it. The people who are coming into conversations about morality and human flourishing with a challenge to it that they don't give a shit about human flourishing, they're like people walking into the Gossip Girl fan group going, I don't care about Gossip Girl. Fine, dude. You don't have to tell us nothing. We can you see your ass out. You can go away.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I guess the issue I ran into was like biting the bullet when it comes to that question. I mean, I actually didn't, for some reason, I didn't consider that sort of approach. So thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for calling, my friend.
Thanks, Roadshow.
Have a good day.
You too.
So I got a couple of navel-gazing questions for you, Matt.
Oh boy.
Objective morality. Like I don't know that I buy objective morality. I don't think we can approach. I don't know how you would define it. How do you approach? William Lane Craig comes to you and says, there must be an objective moral standard, because otherwise, how do you know that murder is wrong? How do you approach that?
I completely disagree. The fact that you'd like there to be some external objective standard that says murder is immoral doesn't mean there is one. It would be nice, and it would make your argument that murder, it's one, they are raised on this notion of a top-down structure of a because the Bible tells me so mentality. And it's, oh, I don't have to have any good reason why murder's wrong. I just have to believe that God said murder's wrong, and that's good enough. Okay. And what is it that makes it wrong just because God says so? Because, God has supposedly, according to you, said quite a few things that I don't think are right. Like that it's okay to own people as property and beat them as long as they don't die within a couple of days. That women are inferior to men and shouldn't be allowed to have property. All of these notions that potentially come from a God. So it didn't fix anything. And this is my response to the theistic morality, whether it's divine command theory or something else. There's not a single objection to a secular moral system that is in any way solved by religion. When you say, what's the objective moral standard? And I'm like, I don't have one. Morality is built on whatever foundation you have. For me, it's the well-being of humans. For somebody else, it may be the well-being of all thinking creatures. And I may even agree. Somebody else, it may be the extermination of humans. I definitely don't agree with that model. But if your foundation is because God said so, well, now you haven't solved a thing. Because A, you haven't demonstrated that God said so. You're just convinced he did. B, I don't give a shit what God said. Or I give even less shits about what you claim God said. I mean, if God wants to come talk to me and say, hey, you're wrong about morality, here's this, then my question to God would be, what makes that moral? And if God's saying, because I said so, that's divine command theory. And nobody's satisfied by that. When we were kids and you asked your parents something and they're like, because I said so. We all know that was a bullshit answer. That was, I'm not going to give you an answer. I'm not going to satisfy your curiosity. I probably don't have an actual answer. Just do what I told you and stop asking me questions. And I don't see how moving that to the level of a God changes a thing.
Okay, but I'm an apologist. And then I say, all right, well, Matt Dillahunty just said that there may be a context where murder is wrong. I mean, he doesn't have an objective standard. He's just going to float that line wherever he wants. He might endorse murder. And I mean, that's where they go, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can be like, well, I don't actually endorse murder. Murder being a legal concept, but we'll just say unjust killing. Okay. There may be situations under which I'm okay with killing, but so is your Bible. If you're coming from a Christian standpoint, if you're a Jain, where you're a complete pacifist and you're wearing, gauze over your face so you don't accidentally inhale an insect, you may be a better person than me. Who knows? But when it comes to here's my view on morality, instead of saying Matt doesn't have a standard and could change at any moment, the criteria under which I will change is when evidence is presented that a change will lead to a better world. How can you object to that?
The other conversation I've had is, and I don't know if I'm convinced that true, pure altruism exists. I mean, because when I do something for someone else, I get a rush, right? I mean, I get fed by that. So that's not absolute 100% selflessness in that way. But I've also come to the point where I don't think it really matters. I mean, if I get a hit, right? If I do something good for someone else and there may be a little bit of a kickback, even emotionally, I get an endorphin rush. So what? Does that become less of a moral act? I don't think it makes me a self-serving person. Do you get into the altruism arguments at all?
I think altruism is a really difficult point to pin down for the same reason you're describing. And that is, I think you can get to what we perceive and view as altruism through purely selfish means. And I find that to be an incredible curiosity that, let's say I'm the most selfish person. I now need to figure out how I'm going to interact with the world. Well, even the most selfish person is going to benefit from publicly donating to charities and helping people. Even if you don't get a direct benefit from those people, the increased clout that you get And the perception that you are a decent person who helps people is a benefit. If you're doing it privately and you don't ever tell anybody, you might still get that endorphin rush and good feeling that you're talking about. And is that altruism? If I did something because it made me feel good, how is that any different from me going down and eating ice cream? That fucking makes me feel good. This is how I became a diabetic. I mean, I liked sugar so much, it made me feel good that it almost killed me. And so I think you can go from, the fact of the matter is, I need to exist in this world, and I'm going to exist in this world with much greater benefits if I am perceived to be a decent person who cares about the other people than if I am perceived to be some hermit off in the woods who doesn't give a shit about anybody and is, trying to level up to Unabomber dumb or something like that. It's undeniable that those result in different reactions from other people that you benefit from. And so, yeah, maybe there is no such thing as altruism, but the thing that we perceive as altruism, which is essentially doing good without a perceived reward, may be false and can be achieved purely by selfish motivations.
I see it as a great motivator. If I do get a feeling of, that warm fuzzy by doing something beneficial for someone else, for me, that's an evolved trait that I welcome. For me, it's a win-win. I'm not, the altruism argument for me has never been a strong one, but it is, again, it's navel gazing. It's one of those things you sit around and stroke your chin and say, does true altruism exist? But I was just curious as to what your take was. So forgive the digression, my friend.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Let's see here. We got a number of callers, including theistic callers, but Annie is calling from Canada. No pronouns listed. Annie, you're on with Seth and Matt. You've got supposedly proof that God exists. So welcome.
Hello. How are you?
Doing all right. How are you?
Good. So I'm going to just jump into it. I want to read my argument first, and then we can go through the premises, if that's okay.
Sure. I'll try and type fast.
It's short. No, it won't be too long. Okay, so the Bible defines, to first define God, the Bible defines God as existence itself, eternal, and the source and foundation of all reality. And I think that if the God of the Bible, calling himself existence, shares the same necessary qualities as existence in our reality, then belief in my God is perfectly reasonable. So the argument. Nothing is the complete absence of everything, even the potential for change. Therefore, if at any time in the past there was absolutely nothing, then nothing would exist now. Since things do exist, we must conclude something rather than nothing has always existed. Therefore, existence, or the state of existing, is a fundamental and eternal quality / feature of our reality. But existence as a quality still needs a source. And since existence is a basic feature of everything that exists, nothing can come before it. Therefore, existence must be its own source. Therefore, existence is the ultimate source of everything. So I've just shown that existence is eternal, self-defining, and a fundamental quality of all reality. Therefore, I've proven that belief in my God, who calls himself existence, with sharing these exact qualities, is perfectly reasonable.
Hey, Annie, let me start. Can you show me the verse where God of the Bible calls himself existence?
I am that I am, which is in Exodus, when Moses, and then again when Jesus refers to himself.
Literally the second call with the same thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, this sounds like Matthew. Existence of himself, or all of existence, everything, everywhere, all the time?
He is existence itself. Existence is its own thing. And
okay, well, how do you get that, though? Forgive me, Annie. How do you get that from I am? Like I am, I exist. Well, I'm Seth. I am. Matt could say I am. You could say I am. How do you get from that to I am all things in space and time? I am existence itself.
Okay, well, first of all, he says I am that I am, not merely that I am. And then we have other verses where he says he's the source and foundation of all reality. The verse is, "For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together."
Okay. So all things that he created would be something created by him, but it doesn't mean that God is everything that he created. He just created it. So we're talking about two different things. And secondly, can you tell me the source who put pen to parchment and wrote the verses that you're quoting to prove God? Can you help me track that down?
Okay, well, my argument is not that God is everything, or my argument is God is existence. So existence is a quality that is external to reality.
Okay, well, hang on, Annie. If I build every house in my neighborhood and those houses exist to serve me, all right, I still am not those houses, right? Everything is not me, and I am not everything.
I'm not saying God is everything. I'm saying existence, God is existence, and existence is a quality that exists separate from everything else that exists. It's the foundation of reality.
I'm not tracking. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe Matt can connect those dots for me.
Existence is not a thing that exists. Existence is this description of something. So existence itself, something exists as a function not of itself, but of itself with relation to, for example, space-time normatively, but it just means that it is. And so in Exodus 3:14, where God says to Moses, "I am that I am," the Hebrew word there for am, or for I am, is it is about, existence, but that passage doesn't mean I am existence itself. That passage could just as easily be I exist that I exist. It is I am self-evident. I am the foundation. But
so he's existence. He exists and he's existence.
But I wasn't anywhere near done. The fact that the Bible makes this claim does not mean there is a God who said that, and it does not mean that there is a God who is in fact existence, because existence is not a thing that something could be. Like, if God is a thinking agent, an agent cannot be existence. Existence is a feature of things that they either exist or they don't, but it's not a quality of theirs. Just like, well, I have to try and come up with another example, but I'll let you continue.
Well, I've already addressed this point. I already acknowledged that existence is still just a quality, and it needs a source. But if existence is the foundation of everything that exists, then it precedes everything that exists.
Existence is not the foundation of everything that exists.
Existence
isn't something that is a foundation. Existence is a description of something. It's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. Something either exists or it doesn't. It is the state. It's like saying, I am hungry. That is my current state, but it doesn't mean that I am hunger.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure existence is the fact or state of living or having objective reality. So it is a thing. Existence is a thing.
It's no. That's not a thing. It is not an extant thing. The fact that there is a state of affairs that we describe as existence doesn't make existence a thing that exists of itself.
Okay, so then what is existence if it's not a thing?
Existence, I just said nothing. Existence is the label that we put on a particular state of affairs for a thing. This thing, this pair of glasses exists. And all it means is that this pair of glasses is a thing that persists within space-time, as how we're describing existence now. But existence itself isn't a thing unto itself as an existing thing.
But again, I already acknowledge that what I've proved is that
Nothing?
existence as a quality still needs a source. So, and when I
No.
try to explain
Existence
that
is a description
is,
of something, that doesn't make that thing the source of. Okay, I exist because I am a package of matter within space-time. So there's my matter, and then there's space and time. Which of those things is the source of my existence? Space, time, or matter?
I didn't argue that existence.
Which of those things is the
argue.
source of my existence? Space, time, or matter?
All three.
Are all three of those the same thing?
No.
Then the thing that you're saying is the source of me is not space, time, or matter, but the intersection of those three. It's the
Right, a fundamental quality of all three.
Stop interrupting me. It is those three together. Just like you can't have a fire without heat and fuel and oxygen. A fire, which does exist as a thing, is the product of those in the change of state of those things. But you can't say that those are that fire is the source of that. And so if there's space, time, and matter, and you say that the foundation for me is all three of those things, and yet those are three independent things, then those three things aren't one thing that is the source of me, right?
I don't follow your analogy because you're arguing something that I haven't argued. Or you're trying to counter an argument that I haven't made. So I can't follow the analogy and refute it if it wasn't my argument in the first place.
You can't follow analogies and address them if they don't come from your argument? What nonsense. Do you only know one argument and one thing that you can address?
I would prefer to actually just debate the argument and not respond to personal attacks.
What personal attacks did I just make?
It doesn't even matter. Can I just get back to making the argument?
If it doesn't matter, if it doesn't matter, then why'd you fucking whine about it?
Can I please just go back to making the argument? I honestly don't even understand the hostility.
The hostility is that you came in with an argument which we have concerns about the assertions that you're making, and we reject. And I've tried to come up with analogies, and you're describing the fact that I came up with analogies that you don't want to address. You're describing that as hostility. Other than that, there is no hostility.
I'm not describing the analogies as hostility. I'm saying that you're being hostile and I'm also saying that your analogies do not apply to my argument. So I can't refute them in a coherent
Here,
way.
let's try again. Let's present your argument one line at a time, and I will type it down so that I have a copy here. Go. Premise one.
Nothing is the complete absence of everything, even the potential for change.
Okay. Premise two.
Do you disagree with that? Therefore, if at any time in the past there was absolutely nothing.
No. Premise two is not a therefore. Premise two is another statement. A syllogism has premises that are connected together, where there's major and minor terms that are connected by connecting terms. So your first premise is nothing is the complete absence of everything, including potential for change. Premise two needs to be a statement that includes one of the terms in premise one and does not include a therefore, because that's a conclusion. So what's premise two?
But to challenge that, if I went to the store at 5, therefore I was not home at 5. That's a premise and a conclusion. So I'm not sure why I need two premises to make a conclusion. When we premise.
I asked you to make an argument, and I asked you to go line by line through your premises. Your first premise is nothing is the complete absence of everything, including potential for change, correct?
Yes.
What's your second premise?
If at any time in the past there was absolutely nothing, then nothing would exist now.
Okay, so premise 2 is not actually properly connected to premise 1, but also premise 2 is rejected and irrelevant, but continue.
Why is it not, like, why is it rejected?
Because nothing is the absence of everything. Nothing cannot exist. If it exists, it is something. Something with no properties cannot be a thing that exists, because then its existence would describe it in a way where it has some property, and therefore it must be a thing. It is absurd to say that nothing, it is absurd to say that nothing exists. It is not absurd to say that there is a state where there are no things that exist. But continue.
I don't agree that it's absurd to say nothing.
I don't care.
Nothing exists.
I don't care. It's absurd. What's next?
But you have to show that it's absurd.
I just did. Whether you accept it or not, I don't give a shit. Go on with the next thing. Let's keep going.
Since things do exist, we must conclude something rather than nothing has always existed.
Okay.
Therefore, existence, or the state of existing, is a fundamental and eternal quality or feature of our reality / everything in the known, everything that we know.
Nope.
Oh.
So you can't have a conclusion that none of the things in the conclusion are contained in the premises. So if your conclusion is existence is a fundamental or eternal quality of our reality, that does not follow from the premises. You don't have a valid argument that leads to that conclusion.
Okay, but you have to show how they don't follow. You can't just say it.
The fuck I
how
can't.
Do I respond to it?
I've described it multiple times, and I've explained how it doesn't happen. The conclusion terms must be contained in the premises. Your premises do not contain anything about existence and whether or not it's an eternal quality. You have an invalid syllogism. I'm sorry, but that's a fact.
Well, maybe Seth can explain it better to me, because I don't get it from your angle.
Maybe you can fucking go off and do some research, because I just explained a syllogism has a major premise, a minor premise, and a connecting term that leads to the conclusion, so that the conclusion includes the major premise and the minor premise. In this case, your conclusion is that existence is a fundamental or eternal quality of reality. The notion fundamental and eternal quality of reality is not present in either of your premises.
Okay, but so it's the reason
why. No, it's
why.
not okay, but it's not okay. But if a part of your conclusion is not contained in your premises, your argument is invalid in structure. Period.
Well, well, can't you give me an opportunity to fix the structure of my argument?
Yes, I can. I can give you an opportunity to fix it. I'm going to hang up now. You can go off and learn how to make a valid syllogism, and then you can come back with a valid syllogism.
You are so lame. Lame as fuck. You are so lame.
Lame as fuck.
Lame as hell.
Fuck. Lame as hell, huh?
Lame.
Why should I? Why should I? All right, I'm going to mute you, and you're going to sit here and listen to me, because you now have called me names, little miss. I don't want the personal attacks. Fuck you. You presented an argument. I demonstrated to you and to everybody who's watching why it's invalid. And now you expect me to sit here and give you more time right now on the show while there are 4 other people on hold so that you can try to rehabilitate your shit argument. Instead, you should hang up, go off and learn something, figure out why everybody else knows that your argument is invalid in structure, come up with a valid argument, then put it out here and present your valid argument without being a whiny little shit that decided to call me names because you can't put an argument together. Are we clear?
Hello?
Are we clear?
Can I please get, like...
Are we clear? Are we
address my
clear?
argument?
Evidently, we're not clear. No, you're not going to get to do your argument again and waste my time and the viewer's time. Go off and do it on your own time and then call back.
Okay, I'll call back again today.
Cool. That's what I said a minute
thanks.
ago. And then you fucking
Okay,
called me lame because you're whiny as fuck. How is it fucking lame to explain to somebody, here's how your argument, you don't have a major premise and minor premise, it is invalid in structure. And then you don't want to, you decide now is the time where you're just going to call me names when all I'm saying is you need to go off and do this and not waste our time. I don't get it. All right. Here we go again. Frankie in Puerto Rico is calling. Pronouns are he, him. Wants to talk about Project 2025.
Hey, Max. I recently saw a video from Dan Pine Creek. He was basically comparing you.
Hang on. I'm having difficulty understanding you, so I muted you for a second. I'm going to unmute you again. Did you say that you saw a video from Pine Creek Doug?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
And, well, he was comparing you to an end times preacher, the way you're talking about Project 2025.
I don't care what Pine Creek Doug has to say about anything. And I just don't care about anything he has to say. What's the point?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people would agree with him.
Well, then they're stupid too. What would you like me to address?
Well, if you put up a video of you and Joel seen side by side, you do sound a lot like him.
A video of me and who?
Joel Osteen.
Joel Osteen? Okay.
Yes.
So when two people are passionately talking about two different things, the fact that they might be sound similar means that they're similarly lunatic or what? What's the point?
It comes across that way, yes.
What did I say that was factually incorrect about Project 2025?
You said it was going to be the end of democracy.
No, I said it was going to be a threat to democracy and that Project 2025 has things in it that would end democracy as we know it, which is true. What did I say that was not true about Project 2025?
That's ridiculous.
Sorry, what?
That's ridiculous.
I said Project 2025 is ridiculous and you're saying that's not true. Oh, and then you hung up. Okay. Well, go tell Pine Creek to try harder.
We just did a conversation with Andrew Seidel on my channel about Project 2025, which is overwhelming to a great many people, 900 pages. I think he said he weighed it, 4 pounds of text. And not just what it says, but all of the chatter all around it. Now, I think he framed it like this, that Project 2025 is what the authors felt comfortable saying out loud. It does not even reveal all the other things that they want to accomplish beyond it. And so to question that it's a threat to democracy, to me, I think you haven't read Project 2025 or at least had it summarized. And I'm interested to see the blowback even by some in Christian circles who were like, well, I believe in Jesus, but I don't want that. And we've actually had some allies in the faith who've come out forward and stood shoulder to shoulder with us against Project 2025. But if you are interested, Americans United has a website that breaks it down. They have a webpage. I think it's au.org/Project 2025. And it lays it all out. And they've got some video sort of primers on it and some personal stories. Definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. There's also the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, which lists Project 2025 as a threat to our democracy, and we must treat it as such, and lists the primary desires of Project 2025. In fact, I've spent time correcting a lot of the misinformation and hyperbole that other left-leaning, liberal, progressive, godless heathens have provided about Project 2025, because it doesn't call for a national ban on abortion. And so if you're saying Project 2025 seeks to ban abortion nationally, that's not what the project actually calls for. It may be what some of the advocates there are actually calling or want, and some of them have called for, but that's not what Project 2025 calls for. And so it's worth it for us to not exaggerate. So if you, who cowardly run off as soon as I start talking about this, and Pine Creek Doug think that I'm being hyperbolic, well, I don't give a shit what Pine Creek thinks, but fucking transphobe. If you think I'm exaggerating what Project 2025 is about, that's fine. You can make a case for it, which is why I asked you to make a case for it. But Project 2025, in the first 180 days of a conservative presidency, calls for the elimination of LGBTQIA and transgender rights, eradicating federal funding for DEI programs, ending reproductive freedom and replacing Department of Health and Human Services with the Department of Life, ending climate change and environmental policies by shutting down the Office of Domestic Climate Policy, the Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy, the Office of Environmental Justice, External Civil Rights, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to name a few, slashing the Department of Justice, dismantling the FBI, replacing the traditional independence from political pressure with fealty to the administration. It calls for purging the government of apolitical civil servants by firing as many as 50,000 and hiring replacements from a database or personal vetted for conservative values and loyalty, a conservative LinkedIn. Successful candidates will undergo training at presidential training camp and be furnished with insight, background knowledge, and expertise in governance to immediately begin rolling back destructive policy and advancing conservative ideas in the federal government. Eliminating the checks and balances built into the three branches of government, which has already started taking place as the Supreme Court has basically turned the current presidency into kingly status with regard to immunity from criminal prosecution. It calls for replacing the Department of Homeland Security with a 100,000 worker strong immigration department, militarization of the border, and an end to refugee programs, and fundamentally altering American diplomacy to push anti-abortion and anti-LGBTQ agendas, adopt a human rights regime distinct from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and abandon international organizations and traditional diplomatic and security alliances. This is just the quick one sheet on Project 2025. It's 900-ish pages. And I don't sit here going, oh my God, it's going to be the end of the world. I'm saying this is the greatest threat that we have right now to our democracy, is the MAGA right wing led by Trump and followed along by the puppy J.D. Vance, in an effort to potentially put people in place who will implement aspects of Project 2025. That is a threat to our existence when you eliminate climate change support. It's a threat to our democracy when you're removing the checks and balances between branches of governments. If you want to say that I'm a doomsday preacher, that's fine.
There is a little bit of is red herring the word I want, or the term I want, where often they'll frame this as a states' rights issue. We want to return all this to the states. This is one of the excuses that they use when they talk about sundowning the Department of Education. But that is actually not exactly true. What they're trying to do then is go and through school boards, local, regional, and state politicians, governorships, etc., then turn these sort of theistic, they're starting in Oklahoma, Arkansas. We've seen it in Texas, certainly in Florida, elsewhere. They're trying to theocratize education. And so the states' rights argument is actually falls apart. It is a distraction. It is a framing of, well, we want to return rights. This is actually part of democracy, when the truth is the opposite is the case. I was right about the website, au.org/project 2025. The headline says it all. 900 pages, 4.1 pounds, infinite cruelty. Project 2025 could mean the end of America. And I don't think that's correct. Or American, and then it lists a bunch of descriptors, whether it's equality, democracy, decency, racial justice, education, that type of thing. It's definitely worth a look. They break it down very well and provide a toolkit so that you can become more of a creature of action on that issue.
Yep. It's one thing is Project 2025. Oh, look. Annie decided to give me money and call me a coward. You should give me more money, Annie. I appreciate your super chat. You can call back despite calling me names repeatedly and even paying to call me names. That's cool. I call people names for free, so it's pretty good there. Anyway, on the Project 2025 thing, the reality is Trump's tried to distance himself from it, and yet the people behind it are people he's worked with, hired before, and the Heritage Foundation essentially handpicked all the current modern Supreme Court justices. They were all the top of the list. And so when there's a conservative president, it is the list by the Heritage Foundation, the people who are putting together Project 2025 and others. That's the list that becomes the conservative presidents' prospective picks for the Republican Party for not just the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's locked for now, but every judge vacancy on every bench ever. So they put together a list of loyalists, and they're calling for, let's get rid of everybody in government, 50,000 employees, and replace or in these branches, in these particular jobs, and replace them with people who are loyal to this. What can you do? Like, the Constitution of the United States says that there's not supposed to be any religious test for any public office or trust. I get that not every job they're talking to replace is a public office or trust necessarily under the definition of that, but that's the Constitution. And the spirit of the Constitution suggests that our government should be apolitical. The people don't have to be. You don't give up your religion when you come into office. You still get to talk about it. But if there's not to be a religious test, what Project 2025 is advocating is saying, let's replace all of these people with people who've essentially passed a test and proper education. It reminds me a little of the pharmacy issue that we've addressed so many times. And that is, if you're a pharmacist, you've taken on a particular job. The demands and requirements of that job are that when a qualified physician, a qualified licensed physician, presents a prescription for a patient, you are to fill that prescription, period. You don't get to let your personal religion or views stop you from filling that prescription. This is a matter of public health. The doctor is licensed and allowed and supposed to make that prescription. Your job is to make sure that prescription is correct and the dosage and all that stuff, and then fill it. And yet there were pharmacists that were like, well, it's my religion to give, birth control pills to people who aren't married or to anybody. And so I just won't fill those prescriptions. And if they don't like it, they can go to another pharmacy. The problem is not everybody can go to another pharmacy, and nobody should have to go to another pharmacy. If there's a pharmacy 5 or 10 minutes from me, why should I have to do all of the extra work and expense to go find some other pharmacy that will fulfill it because you took a job knowing that you would not be able to fulfill the requirements of that job? If in fact the Heritage Foundation had as its plan, let's replace every pharmacist in America with pharmacists that agree with our thing. Mifepristone would not be available to anybody. Mifepristone, the day after pill, which they consider to be an abortifacient, would not be available to anybody. Birth control would not be available to anybody. They don't have to take over the government to do this. They just need to find a way to get people in positions where you're hiring your pharmacists and replace all of them with the loyalists. You can do the same thing in the government. And by the way, what's the motivation for replacing 50,000 government employees with people who are loyal to an ideal, the Project 2025 ideal, the Trump MAGA ideal, the Heritage Foundation, Christian nationalist ideal, whatever that is? What's the purpose of replacing 50,000 government employees with people who are loyal to an ideal when that ideal is not the Constitution? when that ideal is not democracy and the people serving the people of the country. It is absolutely the hallmark steps of a fascistic takeover. It doesn't have to be, you guys act like they have to have in their head the paramount evil, and they have to have the literal Nazis coming back to take over. That's not it. The old statement of, when fascism comes to America, it'll be holding a Bible and draped in the cross. It's about jingoism. It is about doing what you can, because they can't control every election. They can't necessarily flip the House. They can't necessarily take over the Senate. They can't necessarily win the presidency. But if they do win the presidency and they can put 50,000 loyalists in positions around the country and around the government, then it may not matter how much of the House or the Senate they actually control. This is the next step of the trap laws that would prevent access to legal abortions and legal health care by essentially having little laws that, you can't have your abortion facility unless you're within 3 miles of a hospital, where you also have admitting privileges and whatever else. It's what Seth was saying, that Andrew was saying. They're not going to tell you that Project 2025 is the part that they're comfortable saying out loud. That's about it.
I also reject this idea that, Donald Trump came forward and said that he didn't know anything about it. He rejects it, etc. I think our first indication is that he strung vowels and consonants together, and that's usually how you know Donald Trump is lying. He simply does not have the equity of credibility for us to take him at his word when we see someone who is completely transactional in this way, and how he has utilized the power gifted to him by evangelicals, right? It's like Catherine Stewart's book, The Power Worshippers. They've weaponized Christianity for power. And we saw this before, back when Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, I'm trying to think of who the third was. I want to say, was it Leah? Who was going through confirmation, and during the process being asked about abortion, and they said abortion is settled law. Roe v. Wade, it's settled law. It's not a thing, right? They said what they had to say to be able to assume power. Once they assumed power, they reversed Roe v. Wade. So the idea that someone said something does not make them credible, nor should we just accept it at face value if they do not have that equity of credibility.
Yep. It's Kavanaugh didn't, maybe it was Gorsuch that said that, and Kavanaugh said something similar, but in any
Coney
case,
Barrett did for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's got a tremendously jacked up background too, with the whole people of praise cult. I mean, I just don't feel like that was talked about nearly enough when she was going through confirmation. And then, we're talking about it. Did you read about the people of praise? Holy shit, it's the Handmaid's Tale kind of thing. So
it's wild, and yet she's comfortable as a woman on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
I wonder if they just, if you put women on the Supreme Court who then give up all of women's rights to vote or have bodily autonomy, and then you replace all of them with men, and now we're back in, 1723.
It's bizarre.
Actually, we're back in 1940. All right. We got a few more callers here. Let's see how we're doing here. Mike in Canada, Brunswick. Mike's been waiting a little while. We appreciate your patience. You've been an atheist for 20 years. You're currently being haunted by prophecy. What do you mean, Mike? How can we help? Are you there, Mike? Your phone might have gone to sleep. You may have to tap the screen to wake your phone up. As a web caller,
I'm enjoying all the biblical names today, right? I mean, we've not beyond Matthew and Seth. We've got Michael, we've had Matthew, we've had David. It's very much a biblical kind of show.
So, Mike, I'm going to put you back in the queue. If you're on your phone, or I can see you're calling in through the web client. And so if you're on your phone, you may have to tap the browser, but we'll see if we can get you back on in a little bit. In the meantime, Lexi is calling from Tennessee, pronouns are she, her, recently deconstructed, having a difficult time with the fear of death and loss of community. I understand both of them, but one of them more than the other. How are you, Lexi, and how can Seth or I help?
Hi. I'm a little nervous, so I just want to apologize ahead of time because I'm not big on like public speaking, and for some reason this feels like public speaking.
No, you're doing great. You're doing fine.
Also, I want to say thank you to the call screener, Stephanie, because she's super nice.
Yes. Thank you, Stephanie. You are awesome.
Yeah. So, I guess I just recently, like, I mean, it's been like a slow process over like a couple of years, I guess, but just recently in the past few days, I kind of was like, oh, I am an atheist, like not spiritual or anything else. I researched paganism for a while, and I kind of just finally said it out loud for the first time, like, oh, I don't believe in any of this, which is kind of scary because my whole family is very like Southern Baptist, which I know you have some experience with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, it feels like kind of like I don't know, it feels like my whole world's kind of crumbling down. Like, that's so dramatic. But just, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Well, it's like anytime I think about, like, okay, so when I die, there's nothing. You know, energy in my brain shuts off, and that's it. But it's like when I think about it, I feel like I'm going to have a panic attack. And I guess it's because my brain can't understand the concept of it not existing. So it's just, it's like I can't think about it because I feel like I'm just, yeah. So, and then I'm also having problems with, of course, my family, and they're saying that I'm, the devil's deceiving me, and that's why now when I look at certain religious practices and even actually read the Bible for the first time, it all seems more like nonsense. And so they're saying that it's the devil deceiving me. Yeah, I know that's a lot, but yeah. So I just wondered if you had any advice for me.
How long's it been since you regularly kind of came out and said, yeah, I believe this?
I mean, as far as like, I mean, I haven't mentioned anything about, you know, my walk with Jesus or whatever to my family in a couple of years, but I guess they just thought that I was kind of maybe questioning things or that I had lost my way or whatever, but now it's like, it's out and official. And so I guess they're shocked because they really thought that I was just having like a temporary, I don't know, you know, just questioning, and then I would come back to it eventually. But now it's like, no, I really don't believe it anymore. And yeah, so it's been a slow process, but I guess it seems abrupt for them.
I have thoughts if anybody's interested. I understand the shock of someone who may believe in heaven and hell, or who may think that they'll live eternally while you may not in the same place, or that you may not experience all the best, the joy and the love and all the things that their religion says that it provides. And so they're freaking out. And in that way, panicky people tend to say and do a lot of alarming things, and they cross a lot of lines that they should not cross. These people don't get to tell you who you are or how to live, right? And the questions that you've had are valid questions. They are the types of questions that likely led Matt and me and millions of other people out of Christianity and other religions. And it's a gutsy journey to take. I find that really impressive. So I know things have been difficult for you, but you are doing things. You are giving yourself permission to step into uncharted territory in a way that some people, they just never get there. And that's remarkable. Secondly, I want you to do me a favor. I don't think this is self serving, but when you've been a producer activist for 15 years, like I have, you have material online already. It's all set to go that helps to fill some of these gaps. There were 2 videos of mine I want you to look up, okay, on YouTube.
Okay.
One is called, it's 12 years old, it's called Afterlife. You can just, you may have to type in Thinking Atheist Afterlife, okay? Because there may be 1,000 afterlives of other kinds. And it is essentially several activists like me articulating what it means to live a finite temporary life where there may be no heaven, hell, nirvana, whatever. This may be it.
Yes.
But so I don't like the word spiritual, but it really tackles it in a way that brings meaning to a finite existence. Afterlife. The second one is a piece that I released just a few months ago. It is called The Story of You. And it talks about our place in a universe that may not care at all and doesn't really care that we exist. And here we are as specks living on a speck among hundreds of billions of galaxies, etc. Can that life be amazing and wonderful? And can it have that sort of, for lack of a better word again, transcendental meaning? Transcendent, not transcendental, transcendent meaning. Can we really draw the marrow out of these moments on Earth if, when we die, that's it? And I think that my video, The Story of You, will take you there. I think it's going to help you in your heart. I think it's going to give you that perspective. I think it's going to remind you of how amazing it is to be alive, and the fact that our lives are likely temporary is okay. It's just part of the deal, and we will one day be reintegrated into the universe. And in that way, maybe we do have a kind of forever existence. But afterlife, The Story of You. Take just a few minutes, go to a quiet place where you won't be interrupted, crank up the sound as well as the video, and take the journey. And then if you want, send me an email, seth@sethandrews.com, and let me know if you had any thoughts or questions on them, okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that. I think I saw one of your videos that was like Christianity made me talk like an idiot.
Yeah, that's the one everybody talks about. It's a speech I gave in Vancouver, I think. I don't know. It was like 6-7 years ago, and it was so popular I wrote a book by the title. But yeah, I appreciate you watching that.
Yeah.
My stuff runs the gamut, but these 2 I'm recommending, they are not laced with sarcasm. They are just hopefully they're meaning reminders for people like you and me. Okay.
I'd also
absolutely. Thank you.
Sorry, Lexi. I'd also recommend theatheistbook.com and the documentary associated with that. That's Chris Johnson, who's a good friend of mine. And basically what he did was he went around and interviewed a bunch of atheists on joy and meaning in a world without God. So the full title is A Better Life. 100 atheists speak out on joy and meaning in a world without God. It's a great coffee table book, but there's also a documentary associated with it where you can find myself, full disclosure, I'm in it, but and a bunch of other people saying things where I was talking about, life being its own reward. But on the front of loss of community, I did a video not long ago talking about how that's the number one thing that people are lamenting the loss of when they find their way out of religion. And the thing that we need to remember is religion's community isn't theirs. It is about who we are. And generally speaking, we're communal creatures. And so all religions have done is co-opted this concept of community and tried to make it seem like it's theirs. But we can and do build our own communities. There are secular communities like Oasis, Sunday Assembly, and a number of different chapters of Center for Inquiry and American atheists. There are national organizations and local ones. There's recoveringfromreligion.org, which I will always recommend. And I even have tattoo on my body for raising money for recovering from religion. And so there's a lot of great resources like that, where you can, in some cases, you can watch Seth's video. In other cases, you may be able to interact with someone or call in for questions or any number of things. So those are all available. I highly recommend, looking into each of those. Yeah, I don't know. The other thing I'll say is give yourself some time, cut yourself some slack. It does, in fact, tend to get better. Maybe not for everybody, but by and large. I remember Greta Christina did a book on coming out, how and why, and how to do it and everything else. And she interviewed 400 different people, I think, that had all come out as atheists. And they kind of told their stories, and she chronicled it. And out of all of them, I think it was 400, don't quote me, but out of all of them, only one truly regretted coming out, even though many of them had incredibly negative experiences. They still felt better about being able to be themselves openly to anyone and everyone. So that's all my recommendations.
I know I saw a video where you were going to be a preacher. And I was just wondering, like, when you started doubting, did you have thoughts that it was like maybe like Satan trying to trick you? I know it sounds silly, but
No, it doesn't sound silly.
No. Once you've got this notion that you're involved in spiritual warfare and that there is a great deceiver whose sole goal is to draw you away from God, of course it makes sense to say, hey, are Seth and Matt, are we just here deceiving you? And so the solution to that, though, is to say, what is it that we're saying and claiming? Because if in fact there is a God, the people who are advocating for him have failed to present a valid and sound argument supported by evidence. And Seth and I, who both used to believe, we didn't just decide one day, yeah, that God stuff's kind of dumb, we're done with it. And in my case, it was, I wanted to be the best Christian I could be. I thought God was actually punishing me by taking away my software job because he had wanted me to be a preacher. And there were a lot of people in my family and in my church who felt that God wanted me to be a preacher. And so I set out to find how to convince my atheist roommate at the time, even though we weren't having conversations, but I set out, how do I convince him that he needs Jesus? And my studies showed that I did not have good reason for my beliefs. Nobody wronged me. I wasn't hurt by the church. I didn't get disillusioned by anything. I didn't pray for a pony and not receive it. I didn't just want to sin. I was just living my life, doing my thing and thinking, wow, everybody thought I was going to be a preacher. And when I decided not to be, God took away my job and punished me. And so what claim are if Seth and I are the deceivers, what claim are we making? Are we saying there is no God? Not really. What we're saying is we're not convinced there's a God. I'm convinced there's probably not a God. I don't see any room for any God. I don't see any room where God's been demonstrated, but we're literally here week after week saying, call in, present your argument, present your evidence. And then if you watch the questions that the callers don't answer and the evidence they fail to provide just keep stacking up. And it's like, if in fact there was a God that was actually communicating with people, we would know it already. If there was a God that existed and cared and was doing something, we would know it already. And instead, and my apologies, but I did a debate on Good Friday with Dan Christopoulos. And in the Q&A, back and forth, one of the cases that he presented as it is reasonable to accept that this case is a miracle healing from God. And then he used that case as if that miracle healing from God lends credence to the concept of the resurrection. I did a video on that supposed healing case. there's nothing there. There's not a shred of reasonable evidence to believe that this person was healed, which is why they're running a flower shop in rural Missouri now, instead of running around the world talking to scientists about how they were cured of this uncurable disease. And even if, in fact, that person had the disease and was cured of it, nothing about this story tells us how they were cured, and none of that could possibly support the notion of a resurrection. And so if this is the type of evidence that people are presenting, that's the best. Like, here's my shining example here's a scientifically confirmed, or the closest thing to scientifically confirmed miracle we've got. And it's a couple stories that nobody can verify. Why isn't God doing more to help believers not look gullible?
Yeah. But he's busy helping my stepmother find her car keys, apparently.
Yeah.
So.
And busy not dealing with starvation, busy not doing anything for the children that are repeatedly assaulted by clergy, who then get shuffled and moved around by a corrupt criminal organization that touts to be his representative. I would think if I were God, at a minimum, I'd fucking shut down the Catholic Church. I mean, they're a demonstrated criminal organization that took men who were guilty of sexually assaulting children and shuffled them around to hide them from prosecution. If there was a Matt Dillahunty organization that was out there representing me, and I found out that one of the key organizations that was part of that, one of the key communities that was part of that, was doing what the Catholic Church was doing, there isn't a God in the universe that could stop me from coming out and denouncing them and cutting them off. And yet, with all the powers of a God, he sits quietly by going, yeah, I'll take care of that someday. No need to do anything now. It's just kids.
Right.
Lexi, how are you doing? I mean, at this moment, are you afraid of? Did you come out of hell theology? It took me a few years to shake that. I mean, tell me as much as you're comfortable with, but where are you?
Well, I mean, just speaking of today, I had to take a Xanax earlier because I was about to have a panic attack. But I mean, I used to have nightmares, like wake up screaming as a kid because I'd have nightmares that I somehow wasn't saved and I was going to hell, even though I thought I was.
Yeah. Well, they pound that stuff into us early. They brand it onto our brains, onto our hearts, onto our psyches early, right? You're a victim of indoctrination, and they put that fear there. And forgive me for walking over you, but I just wanted to make that statement, right? It doesn't exist because you're weak or you're in rebellion against God or because Satan's whispering in your ear. You were caught likely between what churches like to call the 4 to 14 window. How old were you when you said the salvation prayer?
Oh gosh, I think I was like 8 the first time, and then the second time was like 12 because I thought it wasn't real the first time.
Right? If they had taken you at the age of 18 or 28 and said that humankind came from a couple of cosmically conjured garden nudists who chatted up talking snakes, right? And that people lived to be 1,000 years old, and that fiery chariots flew in the sky, and a guy lived for 3 days inside a submerged prison fish. And one day there was Holy Ghost sex that impregnated an unwed teenager so the offspring could be tortured to save us from the damnation that the Savior created. If they told you all this at 18 or 28 for the very first time, you would have been like, that's crazy. But if you're 8, if you're that trusting 8 and the same people who taught you everything else and fed your mouth and put a roof over your head, you are a trust machine, and they catch you then and it brands itself into you, that's not your fault. And know that religion has a whole bunch of protective mechanisms in place to make it feel like you're the problem. But the truth is, I see you and I think you are a solution. You are thinking for yourself, regardless of what the consequences are. Draw some boundaries. Try not to get sucked into arguments with your family, especially if they're not listening, and continue to live your life on your terms. I think, myself, I hope that really good things are in store for you. Okay?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. We're
Thanks,
hugging you
Lexi.
from all the way over here in Texas and Oklahoma. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know you have other callers, but thank you so much for taking my call. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lexi.
Our pleasure. Best of luck, and call back. You may run into other difficulties. Find yourself a community of similar people to interact with, so that you have somebody to vent to.
Right.
All right.
I see you.
We have a call.
God, it took me 18 months to shake hell. I mean, in my brain, I knew it was bullshit. I knew it was wrong. On every level, I thought, this can't be real. And it exists to control people. And I just knew it up here. And then I couldn't sleep at night. And then I'd feel stupid, right? What's the matter with me? Like, I need to be a creature of logic. I know it's wrong. Why does it affect me so? Why is my heart pounding? Why do I feel guilty? Why am I scared? And that, there are a lot of people who look from the outside in at how hell is thrown into the faces of impressionable kids, and they don't really understand the damage it does. I think in many ways, I call it abuse. It's a type of abuse. It took me a long time, even at midlife, to shake that. So whenever Lexi's talking about her journey out, it takes me back to 2007. And I'm lying awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, going, "What if I'm wrong? What if it's the devil? What's going to happen to me? Will I burn in hell?" And I just want to wrap my arms around her and say, "It's okay, and you're okay, and it's going to be okay." But anyway, that's just me. Go ahead.
We have a problem. The show session just ended.
It didn't say we were out of funds.
It does. It does on my
on
screen.
your end?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I see. Let's not cancel. Vamp for a minute.
Let's see if we can get it back up and see if we can get the callers back. So I'll let Arden work on that real quick. So yeah, wow. Because there's a call that I was going to
auto
take.
renew. That's weird. That's freaky.
It's, I don't know, the more shows we do and the more time we do Cause I Wannas, the more likely it is that it runs out.
I see.
So it's basically, we pay for X amount, and then the more people we have on hold and for the longer period of time, the more it ends up using. So we are literally paying, by the way. This is a good time. First of all, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we appreciate that. It's a good opportunity to mention that you should like, subscribe. You can join the channel. You can support at patreon.com/calltheline. You can find mine at patreon.com/atheistdebates. Seth is there with patreon.com.
Yeah. It's just patreon.com/Seth Andrews. But if you're going to donate today, donate to Matt or the line. So anyway, I'll throw this out since we're doing self-serving stuff. I am working on 2 projects. One is a book project that's going to take a couple of years, I think. But the other is, there are some great Bible debunk websites out there. I say great. I mean, it's all subjective, which ones are the best and which ones have the easiest interface to use, et cetera. I know there's Evil Bible and the Skeptics Annotated Bible and some other ones, but I'm working on one that I'm hoping will come to fruition, that becomes an easy to navigate resource for people who are either, one, engaging with counter apologetics. They're in conversations with believers who are throwing Bible at them. Maybe even people like Lexi, for all I know. And 2, it would be a resource for people who were where I was, where I'm thinking, this doesn't make sense. Am I the only one thinking this? And then you dive into a resource that validates your doubts or concerns or answers questions. So I'm working on a website for that. But you can imagine how massive a project that is. On top of that, I'm traveling all over the US and Canada and navigating 2 websites and all of the other content. So I'm actually looking for a few people that I can employ. You're not going to make much, but as potential researchers, I'm looking for people who are analytical, who are dedicated, who can help me go through and organize some of this information. If that's something that's interesting to you, you can throw your name in the hat. I've got a few people on tap, but just email me, Seth@sethandrews.com. And, I'd like to make things kind of a little sexier, a little more aesthetic, something that's more user-friendly interface-wise. That's going to be another big project, but it's certainly on the burner. So if anybody's interested in being a researcher and that is your gift and you can commit to it, I can't promise much, but maybe we can make a deal. Okay?
Sounds good. As a reminder, in addition to liking and subscribing and joining and all of that stuff, let me see if this is, we're still waiting for the call thing to refresh. First of all, let me tell you about the other shows that are coming up on the network this week. A lot of call-in shows, and they'll all be recharged at the expense of a small portion of this show. Jimmy and Erika are coming up at Sunday Show After Dark tonight at 7 p.m. Central. That's in just less than 3 hours. Erika Gibbon will be hosting Skeptalk on Monday and Chewed Gum on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, she'll be with Arden Hart. I'll be hosting the Hang Up on Wednesday with J. Mike. And Thursday's Transatlantic Call-In Show is going to be Joseph Caballero and Nominal Naomi, which I won't even mention one of my favorite things about that, other than y'all should tune in because they're both great at what they do. Josie just did an episode of the Hang Up with me recently. I haven't had Naomi do that yet, but we should maybe see if that's a possibility. See if doing a hang up. One of the problems that I have with, so the line does a lot of shows in a lot of different areas. Obviously, the Transatlantic Call-In Show is about trans rights issues. If you think if you've been wrongly accused of being transphobic, you can call in and talk about that. See if it was wrong or whatever. If you're proudly transphobic, you can call in and do that. But whenever I get one of the hosts from TACIS on my show, The Hang Up, I want to give them an opportunity to do a show where they're not there as the trans person, where they show up and it's like, oh, on Wednesday we're talking about religion, we're talking about politics, but nope, Josie or Dr. Ben or whoever is on my show on Wednesday, so now it becomes the trans show. And I'm like, no, you call in on Thursday and you can do that where it's focused for it. We'll take the calls, but one of the goals is to give them an opportunity to deal with the other parts of their life and the other things that they value are important. Not that they're, I don't want them to feel tokenized, or I want to give them a chance to get away from that. And so while I've had those individuals on my show, and Katy Montgomerie, I would have Katy on the Hang Up whenever I could. I'd actually rather hi, Katy. Why don't you come on, do a Sunday show at 2:00 with me sometime when you get time? It fits in better with, your schedule being over there in the UK. And then, it doesn't just become trans stuff. It becomes also, hey, here's the other aspects of this person's life, including the kind of recognition of a huge aspect of their life being tied to religion and politics. And one of the people, or one of the topics that keeps coming up on this is, I keep seeing people saying, well, I have a life beyond politics. No, you don't. Politics literally encompasses every aspect of your life. What part of your life is outside of politics? Because even your religion, which we should have a separation of religion and government, is still tied in some ways to politics, because you have to have a guarantee of a freedom of religion. And if that First Amendment that guarantees your freedom to believe as your conscience dictates and to be able to express it publicly, if that comes under threat, if the laws change in such a way that your freedom is either not actually still protected or is so eroded that you don't have it, then all of a sudden, even your religious practice becomes tied to politics. I don't know that there's anything that we can do that isn't in some way tied to politics. Oh, I like to eat. I'm a food connoisseur. Yeah, well, what food is available to you is impacted by politics. The health and safety standards of the restaurants is impacted by politics. When things are going to be open, what they're allowed to sell, what they're not allowed to sell, how likely you are to get sick, how likely it is that you will be able to sue or seek compensation if in fact you are harmed from eating there, or medical attention. All of those things are politics. So when somebody says to me, hey, I've got, I don't care about politics, I don't understand that. I do understand what I think you mean. And what I think you mean is I'd like to live my life and not spend all of my time, or a huge chunk of my time, engaged in political debates, or, promoting the political machine of who we're going to vote for and everything else. It should be about issues. I agree. It should be about issues. But the issues,
I think what bothers me is
political.
the false equivalence argument. I hear a lot of this on my pages. Maybe it's all around the internet. Both parties are equally bad. Both candidates are the same. If you participate, you are essentially enabling the two-party system, which is the problem to begin with. So instead, we need to opt out, as to not vote by protest because third party, or dismantle, burn down the system, build it from scratch. The false equivalence arguments do make me really crazy, because I look and I think, all right, the perfect is the enemy of the good. I had been, and vocally had been, frustrated by our options, but there was no question for me, because I wasn't voting for a candidate, right? I'm voting for a platform. I'm voting to prevent Christian nationalism. I'm voting to prevent Project 2025. I'm voting to protect democracy and decency. Mine was not a cult of personality. And while it was suboptimal in some ways, I was thinking, I had someone say at a tour stop I did recently, I'm not voting for POTUS, I'm voting for SCOTUS. I'm voting for a platform. Now, granted, recent events for me have injected real excitement. And I know that's a whole other conversation, but I'm excited about the possibilities. I don't know what's going to happen in the months ahead. We must be diligent. But I think to myself, no, they're not all equally bad. This idea, I think that's a thought stopper. I think it's an excuse, a rationalization to opt out of a process that you have a societal responsibility to participate in. And this is just your way of washing your hands and saying, you know what? I'm going to take my ball and go home. I think it's cowardice, maybe denial. Maybe you're just disconnected from the reality of what's taking place. But no, they're not equivalent. And there is a side that is more in line with our values as human beings and as humanists, and I stand by that.
Well, it looks like we've got calls back up, and assuming Arden's given me the nod, we'll try and give this a go.
You're good.
All right. So, Ken, in the UK, you're live. You get to kind of be a test for the audio real quick.
Hello? Are you hearing me?
We can hear you. Yeah, we hear you. Fine.
Okay.
What's going on?
I called before. I was on hold.
Yep.
But I guess you had some problems. I didn't know if I dropped off of hold. So I might have two requests.
We got it fixed. We're
here.
ready. Yep, we got it fixed. We're ready.
Okay.
So you're live. Hello?
Hello.
You're live. What's up? Wow. And Ken just dropped.
I'm desperate. I'm so desperate for this conversation to begin. So desperate. Is he gone?
So there's another entry in the call-in queue that hasn't been screened yet that is also Ken. So
I'm going to try it.
Yep, just take it.
Ken, can you hear me?
All right. I can, yes.
You're live.
Sure
Go with your question.
I heard music before.
We got it. Go with your question or issue.
Okay. Hi, Matt and Seth. Good to speak to you.
Hey.
Obviously, I've been following you for years. Appreciate how well thought you are. I just wanted to address one thing for you, Matt, and that was the kind of when you use foul language when the other person doesn't like it. So in the course of a conversation, you occasionally say, fuck. The other side doesn't like it, and you double down and say, I can definitely use that. You and I would probably agree on most things that you say on this show, with the exception of that one. And for me,
Okay.
I've addressed apologists sometimes, in London on the street or in Speaker's Corner, and they've put me on camera as they often do. And sometimes I will drop the F-bomb in the matter of conversation. They'll say, "Could you please not use that word? We're on camera." And I will say, "Okay, I'm very sorry," because it doesn't matter to my argument. I don't need to use that F. Where I use the F word is generally among friends, among parents. I probably wouldn't use it. Among grandparents, I definitely wouldn't use it. Among people I don't know, I probably wouldn't use it at all. So I'm just kind of wondering why you seem to disagree with this, and I'm just wondering why. Really?
Sure.
Why do you disagree when it comes down to using? Because I've heard you push back a lot, and I'm not having to go at you. Believe me, I just want to kind of understand why. Because I think I've heard you and Seth talk, and I'm actually glad that Seth is on because he's very moderated.
I bet.
As a seasoned radio host, he doesn't use this kind of language. Just doesn't feel he needs to.
As a
I think I
seasoned
might have
radio
had.
host, he doesn't use this kind of language. Wow. Okay.
He may have dropped one occasionally, but I don't think he does. I mean, correct me
I'm
if
talking
you
about
want.
your implied argument there that somebody who was professional would not use language like this. I'm not on the radio.
That's not
I'm
what
not
I
under
mean, Matt.
FCC.
You know what I
No.
you know what I mean.
You said
know what I
you
mean.
said as a seasoned radio host, he doesn't use that kind of language, and that suggests that there's something. Maybe it's because as a seasoned radio show he was under the FCC,
Okay.
or maybe
How
it's
about
because
this,
he was a
Matt?
Christian,
I'll take it back.
or
That's
maybe
not
you
what I
could just
meant.
keep
That's
talking
not what I
over me
meant.
while I'm responding to this, and that'll be really fucking effective.
Okay.
Maybe
Okay.
it's because he was a Christian radio host. Maybe it's because he doesn't like that
Yes.
particular language, whatever. Seth can go through any of the number of those, but
Yeah.
there's a reason why I use it. And it's in part because I find the notion of offensive words to be magical thinking. There's nothing about the word fuck that should be offensive in and of itself to anybody else. But at a minimum, I recognize that it does. Have you watched any of my like big public debates that aren't call-in shows?
Yes.
How often do I say
I've watched
fuck in
quite a lot
those?
of your content.
How often do I
I'm
say
not
fuck
sure.
in those debates? Yeah, you're not
I'm
sure.
not sure.
Do you think it almost never happens?
It's possible. If you tell me it never happens, then I'll agree with you.
Oh, I won't say it never happens. It's absolutely happened at some point. But generally speaking, if I'm doing a debate like that, I don't tend to say fuck as often, really, but I'm not opposed to it. I do it in reaction to people who are saying I shouldn't say it. Are you familiar with Tim Minchin?
Maybe. Go ahead.
Tim Minchin has a song
educate me.
called The Pope. Tim Minchin has a song called The Pope Song.
Yeah.
It uses the word fuck 84 times.
Yeah.
And I'm going to read the lyrics to you because for copyright reasons, we're not going to be able to play it.
Matt,
But
can
I'll
I stop
skip.
you before you read those?
No, you can't
Can I
fucking
stop
stop me.
Okay. Okay.
It's my fucking show. I just told you what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it.
But I'm not
I'm
going
gonna
to disagree with you on this point. I don't disagree with you that you shouldn't be able to say fuck. I won't. I'm just,
What do you think the point that I'm getting ready to make is, person who's not familiar with Tim Minchin or the fucking Pope song? What point do you think I'm getting ready to make?
I think you're going to say that words are not that important. You should be able to say them when you want.
Then why are you calling?
Because I'm talking about context. And this is what I went through before, is like among friends, I can say whatever I want. It shouldn't be offensive. It shouldn't be.
Stop talking now. Listen, I'm going to skip past the first 10 lines or so that just say, fuck the motherfucker, fuck the motherfucker. I'll skip past that.
Okay.
Fuck the motherfucker and fuck you, motherfucker, if you think that motherfucker is sacred. This is referring to the Pope. If you cover for another motherfucker who's a kitty fucker, fuck you know better than the motherfucking rapist. And if you don't like the swearing that this motherfucker forced from me and reckon it shows moral or intellectual paucity, then fuck you, motherfucker. This is language one employs when one is fucking cross about fuckers fucking boys. I don't give a fuck if calling the Pope a motherfucker makes you unthinkingly brand me an unthinking apostate. This has not to do with other fucking godly motherfuckers, and I'm not interested right now in fucking scriptural debate. There are other fucking songs and there are other fucking ways. I'll be a religious apologist on other fucking days, but the fact remains, if you protect a single kitty fucker, then Pope or Prince or Plumber, you're a fucking motherfucker. You see, I don't give a fuck what any motherfucker believes about Jesus and his motherfucking mother. I've no problem with the spiritual beliefs of all these fuckers, while these beliefs don't impact on the happiness of others. But if you build your church on claims of fucking moral authority and with threats of hell impose it on others in society, then you motherfuckers can expect some fucking wrath when it turns out you've been fucking us in our motherfucking asses. So fuck the motherfucker and fuck you, motherfucker, if you're still a motherfucking papist. If he covered for a single motherfucker who's a kitty fucker, fuck the motherfucker. He's as evil as the rapist. And if you look into your motherfucking heart and tell me true, if this motherfucking stupid fucking song offended you with its filthy fucking language and its fucking disrespect, if it made you feel angry, go ahead and write a letter. But if you find me more offensive than the fucking possibility the Pope protected priests when they were getting fucking fiddly, then listen to me, motherfucker. This here is a fact. You are just as morally misguided as that motherfucking power-hungry, self-aggrandized bigot in the stupid fucking hat. The point is that the people who are offended by the fact that Tim or I decided to use the word fuck to make a point are intentionally avoiding the actual context, the actual substance, in order to focus on style and pretending that the utterance of some vulgarity is in any way comparable to what the church has been doing in order to avoid dealing with it. If I've spent time, and by the way, if somebody presents an argument, we address it. And the fucks don't come out until they're fucking dishonest. Because I want to give them the excuse to run away because I used magical language. And if my style isn't your style or somebody else's style, that's entirely fine. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it. This is how I do it. And I try to make sure that I'm using that language at least in a way where I'm not just going out. Do I lose my cool on a You bet. Am I a hothead? You bet. Seth's told me repeatedly I'm a hothead. He's not wrong. I knew it before he said it. Everybody fucking knew it before he said it. Everyone, but if you're talking strategy in this, hey, why do you use language that you know they find offensive? The answer is because they find my very existence offensive. They find the fact that I'm responding to their arguments in ways that they can't respond to offensive. I don't need to play the game by their rules. They are the problem, not my use of the word fuck. And that's the only explanation I have, Ken. And if you don't agree, that's cool.
That's fine.
But
no, well, of course I don't agree, but I'm not going to push back too much. All I'm going to say is, I agree with you. The words don't mean a lot. However, pragmatically, when you're trying to engage someone else, there's no reason to intentionally offend. And when you use those words with certain people, you're going to intentionally offend. To me, I just don't. I don't find a place for it. If I want to have a good conversation, and the one thing you said is, like, when we have these difficult conversations with people who know are going to dismiss.
Oh, you faded out. You may want to touch your screen. Well, while you're maybe touching your screen to try and refresh, we'll give you a second to try and refresh. I will say that I don't agree there's no point in using that language. If somebody told me they were offended, if somebody tells me they're offended by pronouns, which does in fact happen, does that mean I should stop using pronouns? When somebody tells me they're offended that I say the Catholic Church is a criminal organization, does that mean I should stop saying it? Why is the word fuck or whatever vulgarity why does that get a special place where if they're offended, I shouldn't use it, when the other things that I say, which are also offensive, I should use? I don't understand the line because to me,
because it doesn't mean it doesn't do anything. Saying fuck doesn't help the conversation. Saying some other things that might offend them.
How do you know it doesn't help the conversation? And if you're saying it's unnecessary, then I highly recommend you Google Stephen Fry talking about profanity. And when people say it's unnecessary, but how do you know it doesn't help the conversation? Sometimes people have to be jarred into paying attention.
That's fine, Matt. This is all I came for is a little bit more clarity on how you see that. I mean, I don't disagree with you or Stephen Fry about language. I mean, to me, it doesn't make that much difference. But when I'm talking to someone in the short term, when I'm having a 20-minute conversation with them, I don't want that to be the main point that I'm making is fuck. I want to make some other points.
The thing is, I've never made the main point of what I'm saying fuck. It's them that ignore the 5 minutes of conversation in order to focus on the one word.
I don't disagree with you, Matt. I don't disagree.
Then why did you say the opposite? You keep saying you don't disagree with me after disagreeing.
I think I know.
I agree. I agree that they make you angry and they say stupid things. All I'm saying
that's not what I said at all.
That's
not what I said at all. Don't fucking say you fucking agree with me and then say something else that isn't what I said. Seth wants to.
Okay, well, I'm just listening. I'm trying to.
Seth may have an explanation that fixes this. Seth may have an explanation that fixes this if you'll stop talking and I'll stop talking.
What I'm already seeing is escalation, which I think may be what Ken is referring to in the moment. Now, let me make sure I understand your intent. I don't sense that your problem is with the words themselves, the words have no innate power. You're saying that if we are engaging an interlocutor, and we know that there is a certain word, right or wrong, that will set them back on their heels, strategically, in the arena of ideas, if we're trying to influence, if we're trying to sell better ideas, if we're trying to make a good point, it becomes counterproductive to throw language at them. It's not that the language is wrong to throw at them, but strategically we know that we might be doing something that shuts down the conversation. And so we say, you know what, I'm not going to raise my voice. I'm not going to say, oh yeah, well that's fucking stupid or fuck whatever, because we know, right or wrong, wherever they happen to be in that context, they may not understand the intent, or there may not be utility in using language. It may simply raise the temperature when we want to lower it. That's correct. Am I reading the room here, Ken?
I couldn't have said it better. Well done.
I am very much in agreement.
I should have phoned you up before, just so you could present it for me.
No.
So.
I want to say a couple of things, if I may. I see in the comment section that, hey, all tactics are good or valid tactics. I don't think that's correct. We used to say it this way 12 years ago. Well, the movement needs the firebrands and the movement needs the diplomats. Well, that's a huge overgeneralization. But I resist and reject this idea that all tactics are worthy or valid or helpful tactics depending on the result, if we are looking to change minds. Some tactics are less beneficial. Some tactics will shut down conversation, close minds, and have people doubling down when we want them to open up. So you and I might agree in terms of tactics that if I'm in a room full of Christians, I don't say, God, the fucking book of Genesis. Aren't you people fucking listening to me? That is going to work against me if my desire is to change minds, is to try to build bridges, to try to see the best ideas win the day. I think tactics do matter in that way. But I do agree with Matt, the words themselves don't have magical power. I agree with you, Ken, that if we look at language in terms of communicating intent, sometimes they can come off like we are intending to be forceful. We're going after them with a verbal baseball bat. And that usually isn't what we want. Am I close?
Seth, I obviously.
The man's been raptured. He's gone to be with Jesus. I'm also a little bit concerned about how much access to our buttons do we give people? Like, when does raising our voice communicate passion, and when does it become counterproductive? When does it make us more reactionary when the conversations need adults in the room? And I think that's fair. I mean, I raised my voice, you raise your voice, but I think we can say it's situational. Does raising our voice always mean we're just passionate, or sometimes did we allow someone access to buttons that we allowed them to push and we lost our minds? And I think those are two different conversations as well.
Yeah. Did I drop out for a minute? Did you hear anything I said for the last 10 seconds?
Nope.
No. Okay. I was just going to say I really liked Seth's summary. That's kind of what I was trying to say. I don't disagree with Matt about words having magical meanings. I really don't. It's just about strategy in certain situations.
Yep.
It was my point.
Strategy. Hang on. So strategy. So hang on. Strategy in certain situations. At what point in a call with an honest interlocutor presenting an argument and evidence have I been too quick to drop an F-bomb or get heated?
I don't think you've ever been too quick. I think when you've dropped one, it's been deserved. But to me, it's still it's not the right thing. I don't disagree with you. When you've dropped them, it's entertaining. I love it. I laugh.
I don't give a shit about the entertaining. I disagree with you that it's never happened. It has probably absolutely happened. I've probably dropped an F-bomb earlier, and I've probably gotten heated earlier than I have any justification to for a given call. Granted, you have to remember that if you spend 20 years engaging with people who, when they get cornered, engage in dishonesty, well, now all bets are fucking off.
Yes, I understand
that's
that.
Just it.
I totally do.
So if you don't think I've ever done it inappropriately, if you don't think I've ever done it inappropriately, why are you complaining?
I wasn't really coming to give an exhaustive list of every time you've used the F-bomb. There's just been
I didn't say anything about giving me an exhaustive list. I'm saying if you don't think I ever did it inappropriately, what are you complaining about?
The only thing I said is if you're trying to engage someone in a conversation and you drop an F-bomb.
I don't know why you won't answer my question.
Please, please. Okay, I was trying to restate it, please.
No, you weren't. If you don't think I've ever done it inappropriately, then what is the? If you don't think I've ever done it inappropriately, what's the objection?
Yes. Sorry, I do think you've done it inappropriately.
You just said I didn't.
I think. Okay. I think there are times you've done it inappropriately. Yes.
Also, if I may,
I didn't say every time. What I said is every time you've done it is not necessarily inappropriate or too quick. I understand that you're dealing with people that are telling lies or not being completely dishonest, and it's frustrating, and you drop one. All I was saying, I mean, what Seth said is a more perfect recounting of my argument that I could possibly give.
You're being you're being very generous to me, but the fact that I've got an FM radio background means almost nothing here. Matt has been doing this on the order of decades. He is easily one of the smoothest, most articulate communicators in the movement that I have seen. And on stage, in debates, I don't know that I've seen anyone better. So this sort of style point thing that you throw out, I'm going to go ahead and reject that one wholesale. But in terms of trying to gauge intent or communicate intent, I do agree that language, it can be interpreted. It can also be misinterpreted. I reject the idea that if someone says this tactic might not be as good, you are tone policing. I think the term tone policing is a thought stopper. I think sometimes something is destructive. Sometimes it is constructive. We need to examine tactics situation by situation to determine if we are helping or hurting our causes. That's not tone policing. I think that's just assessing tactics for efficacy. Okay?
I agree with all of that and would like somebody to present some data ever to back up their suspicions about what they think their preferred strategy should be. If you don't have data, I see that I'm in this position where I get calls from people or messages from people on a regular basis who've never even attempted to do what we're doing, telling me they have a better way. Cool. I've never said my way's the best. I intentionally have co-hosts on with me who do things differently because I see the value of a variety of different things. But I don't think there are too many people who have successfully reached as many as I have over the last 20 years. Not that I'm better at it. I've put out more fucking content than a lot of people, but I got a pretty good data pool here. If you think you have a better way to do it, awesome. Go do it. And then you can come back and say, hey, we've been doing this over here and it works better. The problem is nobody does that. Nobody comes with data. It's just their suspicions. And trust me, I understand your suspicions. If you think I'm here oblivious to how I'm perceived, that's ridiculous. I'm not remotely oblivious to how people in different positions perceive me. I'm also aware that some, like an example I've used before is, sorry to anybody with young kids watching right now. I don't know why I'm saying that after reading all the F-bombs that somebody would throw a fit about. There are kids who stop believing in Santa Claus because they investigated and reasoned their way to a conclusion out of it. There are people who just, without much work, kind of grow out of it seemingly. And there are other people who give it up because they were mocked on the bus. So on the bus to school, oh, you're a little baby. You still believe in that type of thing. And that becomes the motivation. I don't advocate for that third option as the primary, as the starting point, or even as the best way to do it. But it's undeniable that it works, which is why when I'm doing these shows, I don't start with that. But when you get people who are so mired in their view that they just don't hear a word you're saying, that anybody, doesn't matter who, me, Seth, whoever, could sit here and just point out logical fallacies, point out why we don't agree. There's nothing there that challenges them. And they have defense mechanisms against all of this. This is why religion has survived. It's because religion builds defense mechanisms to reasonable objections. And in much the same way that some people have to be shocked into paying attention, that can be a tactic later on. Do I always do it right? Nah. Nope. But all I need is data. And what I get is, I think there's a better way. Awesome. I think there probably is a better way. I think there are better people at it. I think there are people with more knowledge. I think there are people with more patience. Go do it. Get the data. But until then, I got to be me. And the other thing you got to remember, which I've mentioned many times, is I'm not necessarily trying to convince the person on the phone, because I also understand from scientific data that the person on the phone is the one least likely to change their mind in that conversation. Anyone making a public profession of an idea and standing there in defense, we already know from science that they are more likely to double down in the face of evidence to the contrary once a public profession has been made. So long ago, I decided I'm going to present the best case I can to the caller, knowing that this is what I think should convince the caller. And when the caller is not only not convinced, but ignores and dishonestly misrepresents what's been said in order to try to come up with a defense, I will attack that ruthlessly, not for them, but for the person who's sitting at home watching, who's not in the spotlight, who agrees with the caller and thinks the caller is making a good point. I want that rebuttal to sit solidly with that person there. And I want to expose the line of reasoning from the caller as problematic, so that the 100,000 other people who may share that view, who are watching it, feel it, but they don't have the extra blocking mechanism of actually having been on the phone in public trying to defend it. We know that works. Go read David McCraney's book on changing minds. All right, my friend, we got 3 calls left. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's see how this goes. Brian in Texas, Pranjahiem.
Oh, hello.
Brian, it says you're in a faith crisis, and well, we'll do what we can to help if we can.
Yeah, perhaps. Let me give some some background, I guess. I grew up conservative Christian. Apologies accepted. I would say that I've never really worn the title of atheist. I considered myself Christian even up to this point. But I know that like belief in a God was never like falsifiable. It's not something that can be tested or proven. And for a long time, I kind of reasoned that there were questions that science could answer, and there were questions that religion could answer. They were different. I think the word was magisteria.
Yeah, non-overlapping magisteria.
Yes, yeah. But it's been getting closer to the point where it's like, okay, I believe in this God, you believe in that God. I have no clue if I'm right or you're right. I don't even know if I care at this point. I'm definitely getting closer to the line of believing that there is no God at all.
Well, I'm not sure I
Go ahead, Seth.
agree. He's a genius, but Stephen Jay Gould's religion and science are non-overlapping magisteria. That doesn't ring true for me. I feel like any claim can be made into a scientific claim. Then the next question, I think, has to be, what do you mean by religion? Is it a theistic religion, an Abrahamic religion? Is it a polytheistic religion? Is it a secular religion? I have an interview with Dr. Anthony Pinn releasing this week, which talks about the utility of religion to create community and to help find meaning in life. These don't require a supernatural belief, but they can be a type of religion. So, I'm not trying to be pedantic, but I am saying that a lot of the terms that we're tossing out are loaded with possibilities. So I think we have to get a bit more specific. Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah. I think that when people talk about non-overlapping magisteria and like a God that can't be falsifiable, like usually what people, or at least what I think of, is like pantheism and monotheism, not animism or spiritual, like worshiping ancestors. That seems a little bit further from what I think of when I think of like belief in God. But yeah, maybe I'm just not being very inclusive.
Wait, if you were talking to your ancestors, would that be ancestor worship, or would they be considered gods?
No idea.
I don't know either. I'm sorry, brother. Forgive me, Brian. I'll jump in. I'll throw things over to Matt. But I was just had that thought. Second, my fault.
No, it's so non-overlapping magisteria, which, as Seth pointed out, is Stephen Jay Gould's idea that I reject, as do many of the people I know, including philosophers and biologists like Gould. This notion is that there are how questions, there are what questions, there are why questions. Science answers these type of questions, and religion answers these type of questions. That's not true.
Right.
Like, it's demonstrably not true. For example, why is there diversity of life? Or what is the explanation for the diversity of life? Or how did life become diverse? All of those questions are asking the same thing, despite the fact that one's a why, one's a what, and one's a how. The reality is, if we're trying to come up with an explanation for the diversity of life, it's not a how question, a why question, or what question necessarily. You can phrase the question any way you want. All we really want to know is, what is the most reasonable, evidence-based, supported conclusion that explains the diversity of life? Religion is trying to answer that same question. Science is trying to answer it by looking at the natural world and saying, is there a naturalistic explanation? And then it will either find a naturalistic explanation or it will fail to find a naturalistic explanation. And if it fails to find a naturalistic explanation, one, that doesn't mean there isn't a naturalistic explanation. It just means we haven't found it yet. And we may not be able to find it because there may be facts about nature that prevent us from exploring. Like we have no ability to look prior to the Planck time. It may also be the case that there's not a naturalistic explanation and that therefore there's some sort of supernatural explanation, but we don't have any way to warrant belief in that or to justify it. So that gets us to, is religion actually answering the question, or is it just providing a claim about the question that, as you pointed out at the beginning of the call, Brian, is potentially unfalsifiable? I won't say they're all unfalsifiable. Maybe they are. And so when somebody says, religion answers these questions and science answers these questions, they're wrong. Science does its best to give explanations for observations, and religion doesn't answer any questions at all.
Yeah. Does that make sense? I honestly have not really been exposed to the argument against the non-overlapping magisteria, I guess until now or recently. But I mean, it makes sense. Like, religion tells us, or at least the Bible tells us, that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, rested on the seventh. He created each of the animals just so, and Adam and Eve gave them their names. It's a supernatural explanation for everything that we see here today. But those are questions that have been progressively answered by science over the last few centuries. Well,
if I may, forgive me, Brian, if I may, I think we also have to see tactics at play. Matt had rightly mentioned, the evolution. Religions have evolved defense mechanisms. So one thing, especially that theistics and high control religions do, is they say, well, religion and science exist separately, meaning that, science has to come over here and prove its claims. But religious claims exist beyond the laboratory. They are metaphysical, supernatural. They cannot be put in a box. You can't place them in a test tube. You can't expect results based on the physical. Different rules apply, and those rules are conveniently nebulous and vague and foggy and changeable depending on where you go. It's a defense mechanism. It's a way for many religions to say, we don't have to prove the claim that we are making. It's a strategy and not just a claim of non-overlapping magisteria. And I don't think we let them off the hook. I think we're like, if you're going to make a claim, you are going to have to demonstrate the claim. And if you cannot, that's a real problem.
I think that would be useful for me to repeat in the future, because I hear that claim a lot and believed it really for a long time.
Here's a great example, Brian. I had Dr. Julian Mussolino talk about the soul, which exists beyond the physical. The soul drives us, right? It's the driver of the car. It drives our personality, intention, attitude, actions. And yet somehow the soul can't be seen, touched, tasted, measured. Convenient, right? But Mussolino makes the absolutely accurate statement that even if there was a soul that existed outside the physical brain, we would see an interaction point where the supernatural meets the natural. We would see the soul impacting the physical brain, how it operates, what it does, and why it does it. And that is a scientific question. And I think we have to see all of these religious claims as, well, they're claims, and those claims are fair game to be tested. And if they are supposedly unfalsifiable, or they simply don't pass the sniff test, that's a problem, and it's right for us to say so.
Yeah. Interesting that you brought up sort of the neuroscience of soul anatomy, or the lack thereof. I'm actually like a medical student learning about all sorts of branches of medicine. Neuroscience happens to be something that I like to study. quite a bit. I wouldn't consider myself an expert by any means, but it is really interesting that you get like, I think just about every part of the brain has been that can be injured. We have documents of it being injured and what it does to a person to be injured. We call it lesion mapping. And I mean, you can definitely tell when like these lesions are in the front part of the brain. I'm not going to try dragging this out too long. It alters sort of the personality of the individual. Who they are can be fundamentally changed by changing their neuroanatomy. So
Yeah, it sounds
is
like
that
you're
where
on
the
track,
soul is?
brother. You're asking the right questions. I think you're looking at it through the correct lens. You know, you're well on your way. You probably don't even need us. Just keep kicking out there.
Right. Yeah. Or yeah, is our brain a machine, and it's made up of complex pieces, and that's what dictates who we are.
And when will we become enslaved by AI? That's the real question. Will AI
Or
become the
download
God?
your consciousness.
Yeah. Yes, this is the
Hey,
question.
Brian, you
Yeah.
mentioned something that among the things you mentioned one thing that I find curious. I've talked about it. I've done videos on Genesis as well. So you mentioned that Adam named the animals there in
Mhm.
Genesis 2. So first of all, I raise snakes and rodents, and I can't go a show without mentioning that, which is why Seth will roll his eyes here in just a second, because me and Aron are both in there. Aron, by the way, just did a wonderful video on, it's called "Defuck Our Kinds," because creationists are constantly talking about kinds instead of species and all that. Everybody should just go watch it. But let's say that Adam, when he named the animals, didn't name, like, I have 10 species of snakes. He didn't actually give us any of those Latin names, and he didn't come up with a name for the rest of them. Let's just imagine that he just called that entire kind something, which we call snakes. Do we have any access? Do we have any access to any name that Adam came up with?
No.
Then why mention it? What difference does it make? What difference does it make if God had Adam name the animals? If nobody knows what Adam named them, we don't use those names anymore. It's not not relevant. He supposedly walked every animal past Adam, and he gave them all names and couldn't find a helpmeet amongst the animals. So God decided to make a woman. Now, I don't know why God's marching animals in front of Adam to see if any of them look like good life partners for him. That seems like a rather silly exercise for a God to do. But if Adam named them, why tell us that he named them if we don't know any of the names?
That's a great point. In fact, we don't know, like, what language did he speak? According to the Bible, there was one universal language that everybody spoke until the Tower of Babel, when God had scattered them by making it to where nobody could understand each other. They all spoke, I guess, every language that exists at that point.
And why did God do that?
They could no longer work together to try to create this tower to heaven.
Yep. God
and right
saw
now, the International
people...
Space Station orbits the planet at heights that the Tower of Babel constructors could have never imagined, and God doesn't say a thing. It's awesome. Matt, I have never thought of the name argument. I've never thought about it in that way. Like the names that came with the animals that we use, we can trace back in so many cases, the etymology of those. So what was it that Adam would have named him beforehand is something I've never thought about. And now I have to go down that rabbit hole, which means hours. Thank you for that. But that's good. I'm stealing it. I'm stealing. That's good. That's good.
For it. It's wild in that, first of all, there's a presumption by some that Adam spoke Hebrew and that Hebrew is the lost language. But what the Bible says in Genesis 11 about Tower of Babel is that the world was of one language. And God looked down and said, wow, look at these people. They're working together. If we don't put a stop to this, there's nothing that they won't be able to accomplish. So these human beings were cooperating towards a common goal. And God knew there's no way they're going to build a tower to heaven. And by the way, it doesn't even say they were trying to build a tower necessarily to heaven or to reach the heavens or to reach God in that literal sense. They were building a tower. They wanted it tall enough so that people could see it from miles around, so that they would be able to constantly find their way back to the city. And he's like, God's like, if we don't do something now, there's nothing that they won't be able to accomplish. So let's make it so they can't communicate. Now, meanwhile, I have Google Translate on my phone. I'm waiting for my device to recognize that I just said 2 words that should trigger it, and it's not going to. So good job. But I have that on my phone. There's not much in the way of spoken language, at least most of the modern common spoken languages, that I can't get a translation to or from. So God failed to keep us from communicating. And now we have, as Seth pointed out, the space station. And we've done a lot together. But my case, which I made in a video, is that Genesis chapter 11 talks about a world that is full of humanistic principles of cooperation and communication and working together for a common goal. And that God looks down and says, wow, they're really doing it. If we don't stop this, there's nothing they won't be able to achieve. And then he stops it. But he ultimately fails at that because he didn't stop us from succeeding. All he did was put a little hurdle there for us to get over, which actually made us better. Because while there's tons of different problems trying to communicate and translate, there's massive increase in art and beauty and different ways of thinking because of the languages. Because some languages have gendered word concepts, which betray potentially sexist tropes or views about how our genders meld with reality as to what does it mean to be masculine? What's it mean to be feminine? Other languages don't have those same things, but they'll write left to right or right to left. They'll have different linguistic structure of where nouns and verbs are and where you should have clauses and everything else. And because of that, it inspires people to think differently, so that now, instead of us all being on the same page in exactly the same way, we can all be on the same page from different perspectives. And because of that, each individual's unique perspective contributes to a whole that provides us overall a more likely, more accurate model of reality and a better hope for progress.
Yeah, I especially resonate with the beauty of having different languages and sort of it arising into like the different forms of art that different cultures create. I would much prefer living in a world that had the many religions. Sorry, the many languages. There we go. Than in a world with just one.
I'd prefer living in a world with a history of many different religions that are now history, because I think that it's the failures, but we did learn stuff. Don't be wrong. I'm a outspoken godless heathen, and I think the Catholic Church is a corrupt criminal organization, and I think the Bible is, in many ways, a laughable book for people to try to base their life on. But there are beautiful passages and beautiful thoughts in the Bible that are still inspiring, even to secularists now. But the problem is that they don't in any way attest to the truth of the foundational theological doctrines there. What they do attest to is the truth and beauty of who we are as human beings. Because in much the same way that we invented Deadpool and Wolverine, we probably invented every god that came along in the history. This is our attempt at trying to make sense of the world we're in, find our place in it, and entertain ourselves. It's when you take concepts that are good and inject concepts that are bad and say these two must go hand in hand. If you love the natural world and find beauty there, you must be grateful to God. And if you find a justification, if you are repulsed by the concept of physically killing someone else, that must be because there's a God. It's right there in the 10 Commandments. Ha ha ha.
I mean, for the longest time, I mean, I miss the times when I was a kid, and I did give thanks for all of these things. I felt like pretty positive in those days. I felt like God was with me, and my life had a purpose, and the suffering had a point, that I would be refined in a holy fire and become, I don't know, God's perfect son or something.
Yeah.
Those were like helpful things, I think, especially considering a lot of the stuff that was going on when I was a kid. It was, it definitely gave me some resilience in those days.
Yep. Well, Brian, I appreciate the call. I really appreciate the fact that, you're struggling with stuff. I will always recommend recoveringfromreligion.org as a viable path to find people to talk to, and the Secular Therapy Project as a way of finding counseling if the problems are such that you need additional things like that. Also, finding local communities of people who are struggling with similar things. As you move forward, you said you're in medical school right now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. As you move forward with this, I would be interested. You can call and check in whenever you want to, but I'd personally be interested in, I love the notion. There are some people who go to medical school and come out the other side more convinced that there's a God. I hear this all the time. I don't necessarily hear from, I don't necessarily hear from those people. And yet I also know people who, in the process of going through any university, but especially in, things like medical school, come out the other side going, wow, yeah, intelligent design's absolute nonsense. And there's no reason to think there's a God. And when I see, cancer and problems in infants that are born, deformed and carrying diseases, it makes me wonder, how could anybody think? So I'd be curious, as you go through this, how what you learn and what you study and what you focus on in medical school impacts your beliefs before and after they change, and what they change into.
Right. Well, I would say that this sort of crisis of faith has been sort of drawn out over the many years since university days. I mean, I was a pretty devout Christian even coming out of university, but that was mostly because I went to A&M. I don't know how much you know about that university. I'm sure you do if you're based in Texas.
Texas A&M School of Animal Husbandry. I've been there.
Yeah. I had a biochemistry degree in that school.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But it's very conservative. There's a church in every block. There's plenty of opportunities to reinforce at least Christianity. Not a lot of exposure to the other religions.
Are you still in that area?
No, I'm in Houston now. Okay. In fact, I think the majority of my deconversion has taken place when I moved. Probably not a coincidence.
Yeah, I'm not trying to out you or anything else. I was just saying, so you went to A&M, which is up in Bryan College Station area.
Yeah.
Arden and I, because I can't stop talking about it, on the weekend of the 16th through the 18th, we will be working the Herps Reptile Expo in Bryan College Station that weekend. And the weekend before that, we'll be in Corpus. So we're hitting up some of the reptile expos there. And I was like, wow, if Brian's actually in, College Station area and wants to sneak up there, it'd be cool to say hi at the reptile expo if you're into that at all. But if not, either way, we really appreciate the call and keep in touch.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's pretty unlikely that I'd be able to make it away for a weekend just because medical school is really intense. For anyone who's in the comment section, it's definitely worth it, but not for everybody.
Yeah.
I
heard about it quite a bit from Dr. Ben.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm assuming you're wanting to get on to the next caller. There's a time limit.
You are the final caller, Brian. I gotta put a button on the show.
All right. I might have to call back at some point, because I think there was a bit more of the question that I'd posted. What does it take to leave your childhood faith? There's all sorts of implications that a lot of this community has already walked through that I would have to deal with in the future, going forward, coming out as atheist. My mom, for example, is Pentecostal, not just any denomination of Christian, but that one. So dealing with family struggles is going to be difficult, especially, since I've already been dealing with it. This would make it more extreme.
I will say,
But
I wish we had time to get into more, but in less than 2 hours, Jimmy and Eric will be back up for the Sunday show after dark here to answer more questions and everything else. You can call back then, you can call back another week and everything else, but I got to wrap us up now for this one.
Yeah, no problem. I might have to just come back.
Cheers. Thanks, Brian.
See you, Brian. Thanks, brother.
All right. It was a pleasure.
Oh,
Ow.
There's always this weird delay. And so I think, okay, that's the goodbye. I click the drop button, and then out of politeness, almost everybody goes, well, thank you. And then I cut it off.
Yeah.
I'm not hanging up on them mid-speak. There's a delay in the web interface between when I click the button and when something happens. So Seth, I know that you just did you did talks in St. Louis and elsewhere. Where are you next? Where people can potentially
Oh my gosh.
hang out with you and see you.
Yeah, well, I'm speaking at the Baja Con Blue Water Atheist Humanist Conference in Sarnia, Ontario. That's coming up the second weekend in August. It's funny, I'm doing that conference, and then Sunday we finish in the afternoon, and I'm driving 3 hours to Toronto, and I'm speaking for CFI West Sunday night, and then flying home at like 6 the next morning. So it's going to be a wild weekend. And then I'm going out, I'll be at the Kentucky Free Thought event. I've got speeches coming up in Bentonville, Arkansas, Knoxville, Tennessee. I don't know. There's some other stuff on the horizon. I've actually got major conventions as well that even at whether I'm participating or not, it's a great resource. Just go to thethinkingatheist.com and you can click on the events tab. And I think it's CSI's coming up. The Dr. Brian Cox and Neil deGrasse Tyson are going to be at that one. And I try to keep those updated. So just go to thethinkingatheist.com and you'll click the events tab there. It should all be listed, the major ones anyway.
And on that note, in part because of some health reasons and working with oral surgeon stuff, I'm not doing much, if any, public speaking this year. Basically, I'm only doing debates. I don't think I'm I don't think there's any convention I've agreed to right now. But in the meantime, we'll continue to be doing both these shows, and you can find myself and Arden at a variety of reptile expos in and around Texas, in Dallas, and Austin, San Antonio, Houston, Corpus Christi. Will be at Corpus Christi the second weekend in August. But we're going to keep building stuff here. Jimmy's got a lot of stuff. You guys that are watching right now, first of all, huge thank you. But watch again at 7 o'clock, and somebody should call in or prompt in chat to get Jimmy to tell you more details about what's coming up on the Line Network, where we're adding a number of different shows and some, well, damn, I can't say that stuff yet. But there's stuff going on, and you can prod and poke Jimmy for that. In the meantime, huge thank you to Seth Andrews for joining me this week on the Sunday show during the day. Thank you to Arden for producing. Thank you to Stephanie for being an awesome moderator. All of our moderators for their stuff in chat. And there's a list of patron producers right there on the right to help make the show happen. Please consider contributing and participating, in part because a lot of these YouTube videos wind up getting demonetized, and not because I say fuck more than anybody else you know. In the meantime, patreon.com/calltheline and linemerch.com, where you can pick up your own merch.